Hey, good morning. Nice to see you, General.
Hey, good to see you this.
Good morning. I call this hearing to order. We have quite a full House today. I welcome the audience. This is a formal Senate hearing, and in order to allow the committee to conduct its business, we'll maintain decorum. That means if there are disorders or demonstrations by a member of the audience, the person causing the disruption will be escorted from the room by the Capitol Police. Since this is our first hearing of this session, I'd like to welcome our new members, Senators Jerry Moran and Joni Ernst, Tammy Duckworth, and Kamala Harris. Thank you very much, and congratulations on joining the committee. I also like to welcome Senator Tom Carper in his new role as the ranking member of the committee. You are here, even if you have a scratchy throat. 40 years from when you were Treasurer of Delaware, Member of Congress, Governor, Member of the U.S. Senate, have not missed a day. You are Cal Ripken Jr. and the Iron Man, so thanks for being here. Thank you. I look forward to working with you. Yeah, he deserves applause. That's right. With regard to procedure, we will follow the early bird rule in terms of the order of member questions. Members who are here at the start, as you all are, will be placed in the line based on your seniority on the committee. Members who arrive after the hearing has started will be added to the line in order they arrive. With respect to today's hearings, we'll abide by the committee's 5-minute rule. The 5 minutes includes not just the questions, but also the nominee's answers. So I ask our members to please leave enough time for the nominee to answer your question. Today we'll have many rounds of questions as are necessary so that members' questions are answered. Today's hearing is to consider the nomination of Attorney General of Oklahoma, Scott Pruitt, to be the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. Attorney General Pruitt has been a distinguished public servant as well, and we will hear from the same from his fellow Oklahomans today. He served 8 years in the Oklahoma State Senate before being elected Attorney General of Oklahoma in November of 2010, where he still serves. There are numerous statements from his peers and the people that he has helped over the years that stand as a testament to his strong qualifications to run the Environmental Protection Agency. 24 state attorneys general wrote to both Ranking Member Carper and to me stating that, quote, as attorneys general, we understand the need to work collaboratively to address threats to our environment that cross state lines, as well as the importance of a federal counterpart in the EPA administrator who possesses the knowledge, experience, and principles to work with our states to address issues affecting our environment. We believe that no one exemplifies these qualities more than Scott Pruitt. Now, Attorney General Pruitt has taken on polluters, including the oil industry, when there is cause. Randy Ellis, an award-winning investigative reporter with the Oklahoman newspaper, praised Pruitt for his ability to take on industry. The paper highlighted the work of Attorney General Pruitt to hold a large oil company accountable. This is what Ellis stated. He said, Mr. Pruitt demonstrated that he will take on industry when they overstep, when he sued oil companies such as BP, who knowingly double-dipped by collecting reimbursements for corrective action environmental costs for sites that they polluted. This is why I believe President-elect Trump nominated Attorney General Pruitt to serve as the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. The EPA, under the leadership of a qualified and responsible administrator, is a vital tool that must be used to protect the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the communities where our families live. It's truly a sacred trust. Colleagues on both sides of the aisle say that Attorney General Pruitt has the right experience for the position. Attorney General Pruitt understands the need to both protect the environment while allowing our nation's economy to grow. The agency needs a leader who will follow the laws created by this committee. During the last 8 years, EPA administrators created broad and legally questionable new regulations which have undermined the American people's faith in the agency. These regulations have done great damage to the livelihoods of our nation's hardest-working citizens. The regulatory zeal of the last 8 years has violated a fundamental principle of environmental stewardship, which is do no harm. This failed environmental leadership has contributed to two of the worst government-created environmental disasters in decades, the Gold King mine spill and Flint, Michigan's water crisis. Those disasters hurt people, many from low-income and minority communities who can least afford it. As I've discussed with Attorney General Pruitt, my home state of Wyoming is a leading energy-producing state. We have abundant supplies of coal, natural gas, crude oil, and uranium. These industries provide thousands of good-paying jobs for Wyoming communities. We are also, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful states in the nation. We are home to Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks and numerous national forests and pristine lakes and waterways. Our wildlife population is diverse and abundant. We have thriving populations of grizzly bears, wolves, elk, and bison. People travel from around the world to come to Wyoming because our state's natural resources are spectacular. Wyoming has managed to strike that balance between our environment and our economy, and it shows. For 8 years, Wyoming has suffered under an EPA that didn't believe in striking a balance. As EPA regulations crushed energy jobs in my state, state revenue fell that pays for state programs. This includes paying for our vital environmental programs. Clearly, a wholesale change is needed. Any new administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency needs to protect the environment in a responsible way that doesn't ignore the good work that states do to protect their air, land, and water, as well as their economies. This time, I'd like to ask Ranking Member Senator Carper for an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you for bringing us here today. Thank you for your kind words as well. Let me begin by welcoming our nominee, his wife Marlon, and their children Kate and McKenna to what's a very important hearing. Mr. Pruitt, this past Sunday morning, I rose at dawn. I went for a long run. It took me through a beautiful state park in the northern part of Delaware. I reached the park at sunrise just as the sun was coming up and the sky was turning a brilliant blue. The winter air was crisp and clear. Wildlife was all around. In a word, it was perfect. As I ran, I said a prayer of thanksgiving for the gift of this moment. Later that morning, my wife and I went to church. And there we joined our congregation in singing a hymn that began with these words: "For the beauty of the earth, for the glory of the skies, for the love which from our birth over and around us lies. Lord of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise." Those words filled my heart with emotion then, and they do so again this morning. In a little more than 48 hours, Donald Trump will place his hand on a Bible. He'll take an oath to defend our country and Constitution. That Bible reminds us repeatedly to love our neighbors as ourselves, and it answers the question, who is my neighbor? Also found in those pages are scores of admonitions about another obligation that those of us who live on this earth are expected to meet. Simply put, we're to serve as stewards of this planet. I believe that we have a moral obligation to do so. A great many of my colleagues in the Senate agree, and so do most Americans. We need to be convinced that you embrace it as well, not just with your words, but with your deeds. Much of your record suggests otherwise. And today and in the days that follow, we need to find out where the truth lies. Leading the Environmental Protection Agency is hard work. That agency, created by President Richard Nixon and a bipartisan Congress 46 years ago, is tasked with implementing our nation's most important clean air, clean water, and safe chemical laws. The EPA is required to use sound science to protect both our environment and our public health. By and large, the EPA has done this successfully for decades while our economy has continued to grow. Many in this room today may not remember a time before the EPA, a time when states had to work individually to protect citizens in the community in which they lived, a time before the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act were signed into law, a time when businesses operating throughout the U.S. were faced with a myriad of conflicting state and local laws affecting our health and our environment. The choking smog and soot a half-century ago seem unfathomable now. Rivers on fire and deadly toxic plumes sound like something from another world, impossible in our United States of America. Today, we have the luxury of largely forgetting these frightening circumstances thanks to the efforts of the Environmental Protection Agency, its employees, in partnership with state and local agencies and with companies across America. In fact, the EPA and its many partners throughout this country have been so successful that it's easy for some of us to forget just why this agency is so critical. And for some, it's also easy to presume that there's not much more for the agency to do, and that just could not be further from the truth. The environmental threats that we face today are real, and they don't respect state boundaries. And as we consider a nominee to run our nation's foremost environmental agency, it's worth reminding everyone here why the mission of the EPA is so critical and just what is at stake. Over time, my state of Delaware has made great strides in cleaning up our own air pollution, but our work only goes so far. Delaware, like many states on the East Coast, sits at the end of what is known as America's tailpipe. 90% of the air pollution in Delaware comes from outside of the first state, from power plants hundreds of miles away in places like Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, and across the Midwest. As governor of Delaware, if I had eliminated every source of air pollution within my state, stopped every combustion source, and ordered every motor vehicle off the roads, Delaware would still have faced deadly doses of air pollution. Should children and others in Delaware really be forced to live with the consequences of decisions made by polluters hundreds or even thousands of miles away who gain economically from our disadvantage? I don't think so. Fortunately, the EPA has recently implemented something called the Good Neighbor Rule to make sure that all states do their fair share to clean up the air. Every citizen in this country has a right to breathe clean air, regardless of whether they're in a downwind or an upwind state. That is why we have the EPA. I remember fishing as a boy with my dad along the Dan River near my hometown of Danville, Virginia. We brought home the fish that we caught to eat, and my mom and sister ate them as well. Today, that quintessential American pastime comes with a warning label. That river, along with countless other polluted streams, rivers, and lakes in all 50 states, are subject to public health advisories, cautioning citizens against eating the mercury-laden fish found in them. We've known for decades that most of the mercury in our fish come from air pollution that's emitted from the dirtiest coal plants and then settles in our waterways. We also know that mercury is a powerful neurotoxin that accumulates in the human body over time, threatening the health of this environment and this generation and for generations to come. The EPA recently issued public health protections to clean up the toxic air pollution from our dirtiest coal plants, allowing families in Delaware and thousands of other communities to once again eat the fish from our rivers, our lakes, our streams without concern of mercury poisoning. That's why we have the EPA. Too often when state and local communities are pinched for cash, they try to save money by shortchanging clean air and clean water protections. Improvements to water infrastructure are oftentimes ignored. Corners are cut. Solutions are adopted that may save dollars now but inflict costly and unnecessary damage later. As we've seen most recently in the city of Flint, Michigan, these cuts can have a terrible, even a tragic impact on the health of the most vulnerable in our society, especially the youngest among us. Today, the citizens of Flint still lack clean drinking water, and the new generation there, which has been exposed to high levels of lead, faces an uncertain future. That's why we have the EPA. You may not know it, Mr. Pruitt, but Delaware is the lowest lying state in our nation. The highest point in Delaware is a bridge. Back home, the reality that our climate is changing is not up for grabs or up for debate. Families and business owners face the stark reality of climate change every single day. And tackling that challenge is not just the right thing to do, what is best for Delaware's economy. It is a matter of survival. Take a ride with me some 30 miles south of Dover Air Force Base, heading east toward the Delaware Bay on Prime Hook Road, and you'll see what I mean. There was a time not long ago when just before you reached the Delaware Bay, you came to a parking lot. Today, that parking lot is underwater. Stand there with me looking to the east, and you'll see part of a concrete bunker sticking up out of the water about 1 o'clock. Recently, someone showed me a photo taken of that bunker in 1947, the year I was born. It was on dry land, 500 feet west of the water's edge, 500 feet west. But our little state alone cannot stem the flow of greenhouse gases into our atmosphere that's largely causing our climate to change, our seas to rise, and our coastline to retreat. Every state must do its fair share to safeguard our climate and their neighbors. That is why we have the EPA. Examples of air and water pollution produced by one state and fouling the air and water of others can still be found in too many parts of America, like the runoff from Pennsylvania that degrades the waters of the Chesapeake Bay, or the haze exported from other states that oftentimes shrouds the Smoky Mountains and degrades visibility at the Grand Canyon. That's why we have the EPA. And some of my colleagues describe me as recovering governor. For the most part, I believe that governors and presidents deserve deference in picking the members of their leadership teams, and as a result, I've given presidents of both parties that deference in most instances. Since coming to the Senate in 2001, I've opposed only one of the nominees for EPA administrator, supporting 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats nominees. Subsequently, every EPA administrator I've supported demonstrated clearly that they were committed to furthering the overall mission of the EPA, protecting human health and our environment. I'm also committed to a full and fair confirmation process with respect to our nominations that this President-elect has offered too. And having said that, though, I've shared with Mr. Pruitt, and I'll share with my colleagues today, that too much of what I've seen of his record of the environment and his views about the role of EPA are troubling, and in some cases, deeply troubling. Even former Republican Administrator, EPA Administrator Christy Whitman, with whom I served for 7 years as governor of neighboring states, recently said that she can't, and I quote, "She can't recall ever having seen an appointment of someone who was so disdainful of the agency and the science behind what the agency does." Let me conclude with this. It's hard to imagine a more damning statement, and from one who served not long ago in that position of trust. Mr. Pruitt, to which you've been nominated. Today is your opportunity to show that she's gotten it wrong. To be honest with you, coming to this hearing today, I fear that she's gotten it right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Carper. In a few moments, I'd like to turn to Senator Inhofe and Langford from their home state of Oklahoma regarding the nominee's distinguished career. Before I do that, though, I want to say a few words about Senator Inhofe and his distinguished career as chairman of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. First, I want to thank my friend Jim Inhofe for his leadership at this committee. His dedication to protecting the environment, rebuilding our nation's infrastructure, strengthening the country's economy, were clearly evident throughout his time as chairman. He worked across party lines to get things done. During the 114th Congress, under Jim Inhofe's leadership, this committee held 67 hearings. Of those, 8 were field hearings. 32 bills passed out of the committee that were signed into law. Chairman Inhofe oversaw the first long-term highway bill in a decade. This law will improve the nation's roads, bridges, transit systems, and rail transportation networks. He also worked on a bipartisan basis with former ranking member Barbara Boxer to pass badly needed Water Resources Development Act legislation. This new law prioritizes dam, waterway, and port construction projects, and it supports flood control projects that protect millions of people. For the first time in 40 years, the Toxic Substances Control Act was modernized under Chairman Inhofe's tenure. This law enacts a new uniform regulatory program that will improve public confidence in the safety of chemicals, promote innovation, and provide manufacturers with certainty regarding regulation. Chairman Inhofe also worked to keep the administration accountable. Chairman Inhofe worked to ensure that there was oversight of overreaching administration regulations concerning the Clean Power Plan, waters of the U.S., the Stream Buffer Rule, coal ash regulations, and many more. So I'm very glad that Senator Inhofe will remain on the committee. I look forward to working closely with him to protect our environment and bolster our nation's economy. Senator Inhofe, thank you for your hard work, your dedication, and your leadership. Senator Inhofe, you're now recognized to introduce and talk about Attorney General Pruitt. Thank you.
Senator Barrasso, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to working in a very senior position on your committee. And this is the committee that gets things done, as Scott Pruitt's fully aware. And I thank you, Chairman Barrasso, and also you, Senator Carper, for letting me join you for this. And I'm honored to join my fellow senator, Senator Langford, in introducing not just the Attorney General of Scott Pruitt, but my good friend, and to offer my support for his nomination to be the next administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. Though neither of us were born in Oklahoma, we got here as quick as we could, and both ended up in Tulsa, so he's also a neighbor. Attorney General Pruitt, you'll be glad to know this, Charles Sublett. He was born in Kentucky, and he showed what he was made out of, and ended up a great baseball player that was able to get a scholarship and go through the university there. Then he came to Oklahoma, went through law school at Tulsa, University of Tulsa, and did all kinds of things, specialized at that time in constitutional law. In 1998, General Pruitt ran and was elected to the Oklahoma State Senate, where he served 6 years, and he quickly became a leader. Indeed, success has followed him throughout his law practice to the state Senate, to become the co-owner and managing general partner of Oklahoma City's AAA minor league baseball team. See, we have something in addition to the Thunder that we all are fully aware of. He is currently Oklahoma's, of course, Attorney General. Through the course of his career, Attorney General Pruitt has stood out as a champion of state and individual rights and has fought against federal overreach. He has earned a reputation as a defender of the rule of law and has worked to keep the role of the federal government in check. As head of the Environmental Protection Agency, Attorney General Pruitt will ensure that the agency fulfills the role delegated to it by the laws passed by Congress, nothing more and nothing less. Oklahoma is an energy and agricultural state, but we're also a state that knows what it means to protect the environment while balancing competing interests. As Attorney General, Scott was instrumental. Oh, this is a big deal. We actually have had an ongoing litigation for 100 years. It was the state of Oklahoma, the city of Oklahoma City, it was the Choctaw Nation, it was the Chickasaw Nation. It was over water rights. We weren't able to resolve that problem. This guy comes trotting along and resolves it overnight after 100 years of failures of trying to get this done. He's also worked with the Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality and the Oklahoma Water Resources Board to protect the scenic rivers. He's kind of a hero of the scenic rivers place. People don't know, Scott, that we in Oklahoma actually have more miles of freshwater shoreline.
Would ask the senator to please suspend his remarks for a few seconds. Thank you, Senator Inhofe.
They obviously don't like scenic rivers, but we do in Oklahoma. Anyway, additionally, in 2012, Oklahoma partnered with three other states, New Mexico, Colorado, Kansas, and Texas, to bring together state officials, conservation groups, energy and ag industries, and other private landowners to address the challenges facing one of the problems that we have there having to do with what might become an endangered species. It was an effort that saw success in its first year. Now, this is working with four different states. Despite endorsing the plan, the Fish and Wildlife Service moved forward with listing the species as threatened, endangering the cooperation reached between these varying interests. So Attorney General Scott sued the Fish and Wildlife Department for ignoring the unique cooperative agreement, and he won. He wins. He wins these things. Yes, as Attorney General, Scott Pruitt has fought the EPA, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the oil companies, and the outgoing administration on many fronts. But all of these suits were brought to protect state and local interests from overzealous and activist executive agencies. Over the last 8 years, the Obama administration has advanced a radical environmental agenda, has exhibited a deep distrust of state governments and private landowners, and has worked to obstruct the fossil fuel industry and agriculture producers, the most ardent protectors of the environment. These are industries and interests that Oklahoma relies on, and far from being an enemy of the environment, Scott has proven himself to be an expert at balancing economic growth with environmental stewardship. So it's my belief that Attorney General Pruitt will return the Environmental Protection Agency to its proper role as a steward for the environment, acting within the bounds prescribed by Congress and the Constitution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Inhofe. Senator Langford.
Chairman Barrasso, thank you. Ranking Member Carper, members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to be able to be here today, introduce my fellow Oklahoman, and for Senator Inhofe and I to both be able to stand with him and to be able to introduce who we believe will be a tremendous nominee as Administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency. It's an honor to speak in support of Attorney General Pruitt today. Over the past 6 years, Scott has been a leader in the state of Oklahoma, strongly committed to enforcing the law and adhering to the Constitution. He's a statesman. He's a dedicated public servant. As the Administrator of the EPA, I would fully expect Scott to lead the agency to follow every environmental law and to partner with states, local authorities, and tribes to do what's best for our present and for our future. As Attorney General of Oklahoma, he stood shoulder to shoulder with more than half of the states to ensure the federal government operates within the bounds of the statute and the Constitution. He's argued consistently that many regulations the EPA promulgates are in fact the responsibilities of state governments first. In an environment where Chevron deference is precedent, it is critical that the leader of an agency that has such wide latitude to extract costs from the economy also respects the importance of our Federalist Foundation and the pocketbooks of hardworking families. In previous congressional testimony, Scott has emphasized the importance of laws like the Clean Air Act, stressing that the intention was for states and the EPA to work together under a model of cooperative federalism that protects the environment while considering economic costs. As Attorney General, Scott has been an ardent defender of the rule of law for Oklahomans. In 2012, he sued British Petroleum, arguing that they knowingly double-dipped through the collection of funds through a cleanup fund despite having insurance coverage for environmental cleanup. He did not hesitate to stand up for his constituents and for his state. Mike Turpin. He's the former Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma and the former chairman of the Oklahoma Democratic Party. He spoke out in mid-December when Scott was first announced. Let me just read a short portion of his very long statement in support of Scott Pruitt. Former Attorney General Mike Turpin and our former Democratic Party chairman said, Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt is a good choice to head up the Environmental Protection Agency. I'm convinced Scott Pruitt will work to protect our natural habitats, reserves, and resources. His vision for a proper relationship between protection and prosperity makes him as superbly qualified to serve as our next EPA administrator. Scott is an active member and a deacon at his church, First Baptist Church Broken Arrow, a congregation of almost 2,000 people. He's incredibly strong in his faith, and he strives to walk in integrity. Scott's a serious baseball fan as well. If you run out of environmental or legal questions today, which I doubt you will, but if you run out, why don't you ask him a couple questions about baseball strategy and spring training, which starts in just a few weeks. I have to tell you, Scott's a friend. I prayed with Scott. I've seen Scott struggle with hard decisions that affect our state's future. I've seen Scott listen to people to try to learn all sides of an issue. And I've seen Scott take difficult stands on matters of law. I think he'll be an excellent administrator for the EPA. And I think he'll do very well today in getting a chance to bring you the confidence that he will work hard for our nation's present and for the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you so very much, Senator Langford and Senator Inhofe. Senator Langford, you're welcome to stay, but you can't stay in that seat.
You got it.
So now I would like to welcome Attorney General Pruitt to the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. Welcome. I invite you to first introduce your family and then proceed with your statement. But congratulations and welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Barrasso, Ranking Member Carper, members of the committee. It is an honor and a privilege to be before you today to be considered for the position of EPA Administrator. I first want to say thank you to Senators Inhofe and Langford for their opening comments. Senator Inhofe has been a mentor and a friend to me many, many years, and he's spent a lot of time with me through this process, introducing me to many of you, and I really appreciate his guidance and his help. Senator Langford was a friend well before he entered Congress, and he's already serving Oklahoma and this country with great distinction. Mr. Chairman, you indicated to introduce my family. I am blessed today to have my family in attendance with me. My wife, Marlene, of 27 years, is in attendance, along with my children. Change going on in their life as well. McKenna is actually graduating from Oklahoma University this spring and heading into Senator Whitehouse's alma mater of the University of Virginia Law School. And my son is going to be graduating high school and heading to Oklahoma University, following his sister's footsteps to be a Boomer Sooner. So there's lots of change going on in their lives, lots of change going on in my family's life, and lots of change going on in the country. And I think the people of this country are really hungry for some change. And with change comes an opportunity for growth, an opportunity to assess how we can reprioritize as a nation. And when I ponder leading the EPA, I get excited about the great work to be done in behalf of our nation in protecting the stewards and being a good steward of the natural resources we have as a nation. What could be more important than protecting our nation's waters, improving our air, and managing the land that we've been blessed with as a nation, all the while protecting the health and welfare of our people? So if confirmed, I would lead the EPA with the following principles in mind. First, we must reject as a nation the false paradigm that if you're pro-energy, you're anti-environment, and if you're pro-environment, you're anti-energy. I utterly reject that narrative. In this nation, we can grow our economy, harvest the resources God has blessed us with, while also being good stewards of the air, land, and water by which we've been favored. It is not an either-or proposition. Next, we should celebrate the great progress that we've made as a nation since the inception of the EPA and the laws that have been passed by this body, but recognize that we have much work to do. Third, rule of law matters. Process matters. It inspires confidence in those that are regulated. The law is static, not transient. Regulators are supposed to make things regular, to fairly and equitably enforce the rules and not pick winners and losers. A regulator should not be for or against any sector of our economy. Instead, a regulator ought to follow the law in setting up the rules so that those who are regulated can plan, allocate resources to meet the standards versus operating in a state of uncertainty and duress. Fourth, federalism matters. It matters because Congress says so. And because we need to achieve good outcomes as a nation for air and water quality, we need the partnership of the states to achieve that. It is our state regulators who oftentimes best understand the local needs and the uniqueness of our environmental challenges. Plus, our state regulators possess the resources and expertise to enforce our environmental laws. Fifth, public participation is key. We need to hear all voices as we make decisions in behalf of our country with respect to environmental laws. Two final things personally. I seek to be a good listener, to listen and to lead. You can't do one without the other. Listen to those career staff. Listen to those career staff at the EPA, as I've done as Attorney General of Oklahoma, and listen to you here in Congress with respect to the needs of your respective states, and listen to the voice of all Americans as we seek to carry out our duties under the law. Lastly, and this is very important, I seek to serve with civility. Oftentimes as policymakers, you deal with very contentious issues. I have as Attorney General of Oklahoma as well. We deal with weighty issues, and there's passion on both sides of issues. But we should not succumb to personalizing matters. We should encourage open and civil discourse. One such issue where civil discourse is absent involves climate change. Let me say to you, science tells us that the climate is changing, and then human activity in some manner impacts that change. The ability to measure with precision the degree and extent of that impact and what to do about it are subject to continuing debate and dialogue, and well, it should be. So with these principles in mind, I seek to answer your questions today, and I am honored to be here today to be considered for the position of EPA Administrator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much. Welcome to your family, and thank you and congratulations again. Attorney General Pruitt, you've answered the committee questionnaire. The United States Office of Government Ethics has stated that you are, quote, in compliance with applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest. Throughout this hearing and with the questions for the record, our committee members will have an opportunity to learn more about your commitment to public service in our nation. I would ask that throughout this hearing you please respond to the questions for the record. With that said, I have to ask the following questions that we ask of all nominees on behalf of the committee. Do you agree, if confirmed, to appear before this committee or designated members of this committee and other appropriate committees of the Congress and provide information subject to appropriate and necessary security protection with respect to your responsibilities?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Do you agree to ensure that testimony, briefings, documents, and electronic and other forms of information are provided to this committee and its staff and other appropriate committees in a timely manner?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And do you know of any matters which you may or may not have disclosed that might place you in any conflict of interest if you are confirmed?
No, Chairman.
Well, thank you. Just a couple of quick questions before we go back and forth. I'd just ask if you could just please describe your environmental philosophy of what you would do to protect our environment.
Well, Mr. Chairman, as I indicated in my opening statement, I believe that the role of a regulator, and this may not sound too exciting, but is to make things regular. And I think one of the difficult challenges we see with individuals across the country is the inability to predict or know what's expected of them as far as their obligations under our environmental laws. And I really believe, Mr. Chairman, that if confirmed as the EPA administrator, this public participation, cooperative federalism, rule of law being the focus of how we do business at the EPA is centered to restoring confidence and certainty in those that are regulated. Clearly, the mission of the EPA, as I indicated in my opening statement, to protect our natural resources, protecting our water quality, improving our air, helping protect the health and welfare of our citizens is key to the leadership of the EPA. And where enforcement is necessary, a vigorous enforcement. I've done that as Attorney General in Oklahoma. I've taken very constructive steps against those that have violated the law, but we have done so, I think, in a very decisive and meaningful way. So, Mr. Chairman, with that in mind.
I'm going to get one other question, and then I'm going to reserve the balance of my time for some interjection and questioning throughout. But there's still a number of environmental problems that I see in the country and in my state. Cold War legacy pollution is a serious problem where chemical compounds are left deep in the soil from our military activity decades ago. Often they're not the tools yet available to adequately address this pollution. If confirmed, would you advocate increasing the EPA's focus on innovative technological solutions to address these and other environmental problems?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and this Congress, this past Congress, as you indicated in your statement and as Senator Inhofe recognized, with the changes to the TSCA law, there are priorities this year. New authority, actually, it's been given to the EPA administrator to order testing on certain chemicals. As I've spent time with some of the members on this committee, Senator Gillibrand, as an example, mentioned PFOA as a concern with respect to the Safe Drinking Water Act, along with TSCA. And so, yes, Mr. Chairman, I believe that there are priorities that are key to improving our environment from CERCLA to TSCA across air quality, with non-attainment to attainment, and would seek to focus and prioritize those efforts.
Thank you. Senator Carper.
Mr. Pruitt, we don't often have the kind of disruptions in this room and in this building that we're witnessing here today. This is extraordinary. Not unprecedented, but extraordinary. And people might ask, well, why are folks so concerned? Well, I'll tell you why they're so concerned. And you only have to go back to March 3rd up in Detroit, Michigan, where President-elect, then candidate Trump, Donald Trump said these words: "We're going to get rid of it, EPA, in almost every form. We're going to have little tidbits left, but we're going to take a tremendous amount out." That's what he said during the Republican primary. And what did he say after the election? Well, November 10th, Fox News with Chris Wallace, he said, environmental protection, what they do is a disgrace. Every week they come out with new regulations. And then Chris Wallace asked him, well, who's going to protect the environment? He said, responded to say, well, we'll be fine with the environment. We'll be fine with the environment. Well, we're concerned that we won't be fine with the environment. Sometimes words do matter. And one of the concerns that I have is he's the president. You would be his nominee. You would be his EPA administrator. Does all the things that he said in the campaign, do they just go away? In you, he's put somebody in place who was actually defunded or led to the defunding of the Environmental Protection Unit within your own agency. And yet you've joined in a dozen or more lawsuits over the last 6 years, ever since you've been Attorney General, and going after the EPA. That's why you have the kind of concern that you're witnessing here today, not just on that side of the dais, but on this side as well. You just took an oath. You raised your hand and took an oath and answered some questions that our chairman asked of you, and one of them was a question dealing with your willingness to respond to reasonable questions that are asked of you. One of the things I asked of you, I submitted a letter that I think you received shortly after Christmas, maybe December 28th, close of business, and in it I asked a lot of questions. I asked you to try to respond by January 9th. You didn't respond to one of them by January 9th. You certainly didn't respond to not even one. Today's hearing, I just asked my staff, have you responded to any of those questions in writing that I asked almost 3 weeks ago? And to my knowledge, no response has yet been received. That's why we have a concern. That's why we have a concern. Mercury.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to ask you, we're going to start off by talking about mercury. In 2011, the EPA required dirty coal power plants to clean up mercury and air toxic emissions by issuing the Mercury and Air Toxic Standards Rule. This rule will reduce the mercury, a neurotoxin that contaminates our streams and our oceans, pollutes our fish, and harms our children's health. As Attorney General, I believe you've been part of at least 14 legal cases against the EPA, and at least 3 of these cases against the EPA's rules to reduce mercury emissions from power plants. Is that correct? Just yes or no?
Senator, we have been involved in litigation around the MATS rule.
Is that correct? Yes or no?
As I indicated, yes, we've been a part of litigation
Thank you.
involving the MATS rule.
It's my understanding that at least one of these cases against the mercury rule is still pending. Is that correct? Just yes or no?
I believe so, Senator,
Thank
yes.
In the cases against the mercury rule, you question the EPA's determination that mercury emissions from power plants are harmful to health and should be regulated. To be clear, have you ever supported a case against the EPA that claims, quote, this is a quote, human exposure to methyl mercury resulting from coal-fired power plants is exceedingly small? Yes or no?
Senator, that's not a yes or no answer, if I may.
Fair enough.
Okay.
This position seems to question an EPA decision in 2000 in which the agency determined after almost a decade of study that this is a quote from them, mercury emissions from power plants pose significant hazards to public health and must be reduced, close quote. Would you say the legal cases you've supported in the past directly challenge this agency finding, yes or no?
Senator, the challenges we've had as a state,
Yes or
along
no?
with the other states, if
Just
I
yes
may,
or no?
Senator, if I may.
Just hold your fire. Just hold your
Okay.
fire. The legal position you've taken on mercury health also seems to call in question the 2003 testimony from then EPA Assistant Administrator of Air and Radiation Jeff Homestead under George W. Bush, sat right where you're sitting today. And this is what he said. EPA is required to regulate mercury because EPA determined that mercury emissions from power plants pose an otherwise unaddressed significant risk to health and the environment, and because controls options to reduce this risk are available. This Bush EPA statement on mercury risk seems contrary to the legal arguments you supported in the past. Is that correct? Yes or no?
I agree with Mr. Olmstead's position that mercury is something that is very dangerous to our
Thank you very
environment,
much.
should be regulated under Section
Are you
112.
aware that the last 3 administrators have publicly stated that the EPA is required to regulate mercury from power plants because of the health risk? Yes or no?
I believe that mercury should be regulated under Section
Thank you
112.
very much.
Yes.
According to the EPA, my time is about to expire. I'll just hold it for there. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Carper. Senator Inhofe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I don't think you had adequate time to answer some of the questions that were asked. Is there anything you'd like to add to elaborate on?
Yes, Senator, and thank you. I do want to say to Senator Carper's concern with respect to the President-elect's statements throughout the campaign, I believe there is a very important role for the Environmental Protection Agency. In fact, you and I talked about that in your office. I believe that there are air quality issues and water quality issues that cross state line, that the jurisdiction of the EPA, its involvement in protecting our air quality and improving our nation's waters is extremely important. And the EPA has served a very valuable role historically. After all, it was Republicans who created the EPA under executive order in the 1970s, and this body has passed many pieces of legislation since the 1970s to focus upon improving our air and improving our water quality. And we have much to celebrate. Actually, those 6 criteria pollutants under the NAAQS program since 1980 are down 63%. We have made progress as a country, but we have work to do, and the EPA has a very valuable role in partnering with the states to carry out those steps to ensure improving our air quality and protecting our nation's waters. So, Senator Carper, I'm hopeful that in response to your concern about the role of the EPA, I believe it's a very valuable role. And it's something that we should focus on in partnering with our states. With respect to mercury, the litigation that you referred to, there was no argument that we made from a state perspective that mercury is not a hazardous air pollutant under Section 112. Our argument focused upon the cost-benefit analysis that the EPA failed to do. And the Michigan v. EPA case, the Supreme Court actually agreed. So it was more about the process, again, that the EPA was supposed to go through in regulating mercury to provide certainty to those in the marketplace, not a statement with respect to whether mercury should be regulated or not under Section 112. Thank you, Senator Inhofe.
Thank you, General. I'm glad you brought up this thing about the Clean Air Act. The amendments from 1990, I was one of the co-sponsors. It's been incredibly successful. I mean, you mentioned that we've reduced those pollutants by 53%, but what you didn't, 63%, what you didn't add was that is in spite of the fact that we had a 153% increase in our economic activity. That's a major thing. In my introduction, I mentioned this thing that you did that no one could figure out how you did it. Involved a 100-year dispute between not just the state of Oklahoma and the city of Oklahoma City and the Choctaws and the Chickasaws. Do you want to share with us how you did that?
Well, you were,
You know, they tried for 100 years, and you came in and did it in less than 100 days.
you know, less than 8 months into my administration as Attorney General, we were sued as a state by the Choctaw and Chickasaw Nation with respect to water in 17 counties in southeast Oklahoma. Many of you, if you know anything about water litigation, it generally takes decades to resolve water litigation. We were able to go from August of 2011 until 2016 and negotiate an historic water rights agreement with those two nations to provide certainty to those that are regulated, to provide a voice to the tribes with respect to water allocation and water quality. And the state has maintained its position as the arbiter of how those permits are allocated as well. So it was a partnership. It was the way things ought to work when litigation occurs, sitting across the table from individuals and working together to try to solve the problem. And, Senator, we were able to achieve that in record time, and I'm very proud of what we did as a state and as the Chickasaw and Choctaw Nation together.
Yeah, that's good. I think also you got them all in one room, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
That works. You've been criticized, and some of the people talking about some of your environmental record. I would like to be sure that people are aware of a number of people. I have some here that I'll submit for the record, but a guy named Ed Feit is the Vice President of Scenic Rivers and Water Quality of the GRDA. This is a person who has really been at the forefront of our Scenic Rivers program. He praises you, saying, I found that General Pruitt has always done the right by our scenic rivers. He's done everything constructive that he told me that he would do. The same thing comes from the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. Donald Van der Vaart, he wrote, Pruitt is committed to clean air and clean water and to restoring the EPA to its original mission of enforcing the environmental laws written by Congress. J.D. Strong, head of the Water Resources Board, he said, Attorney General Pruitt, and he goes on and praises you. I'd like to know why it is you have become such a hero of the scenic river people.
Well, Senator, as you know, Oklahoma has endured many decades of dispute with respect to phosphorus levels in the scenic Illinois River. In fact, there's been litigation that's been a part of that dispute for some time. There was actually a memorandum of understanding that Arkansas and Oklahoma entered into around 2002, 2003, and that memorandum expired during my time as Attorney General. There were many in government at the time that said we should just wait on the EPA to come in and address the issue. And I chose a different path. I actually reached out to my Democrat colleague, Dustin McDaniel, the Attorney General of the state of Arkansas, and we were able to negotiate an agreement that had phosphorus levels set at 0.037, scientifically driven, and enforced on both sides of the border for the first time in history. And so I think Mr. Feit is actually the head of the Scenic Illinois Rivers Commission. He's been center on this issue for a number of years, and I think his good word relates to the work that we did in my office, working with Dustin McDaniel to achieve that good outcome.
Yeah, I know my time has expired, but Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record at this point in the record the statement by the environmental, the DEQ that I referred to.
Without objection, hearing none, Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks, Chairman. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Pruitt. As we discussed when you and I met, the oceans off of our ocean state are warming due to fossil fuel-driven climate change. It is crashing our fisheries like lobster and winter flounder and making earning a living harder for our fishermen. I see nothing in your career to give those fishermen any confidence that you will care one bit for their well-being and not just the well-being of the fossil fuel industry. In a process that you could replicate in an Oklahoma high school science lab, excess carbon dioxide from fossil fuel emissions is turning our seas more acid. Rhode Island shell fishermen and shellfish growers are concerned. In my colleague Senator Merkley's state, they've already had oyster spat wiped out for businesses by acidified waters. I see nothing in your career that you would care at all about our Rhode Island shell fishermen. In Rhode Island, we have bad air days, and because of EPA's work, they are fewer and fewer. A bad air day is a day when people driving into work hear on the radio that ozone from out-of-state smokestacks has made the air in Rhode Island dangerous and that infants and the elderly and people with breathing difficulties should stay home on an otherwise beautiful day. Because those smokestacks are out of state, we need EPA to protect us, and I see nothing in your record that would give a mom taking her child to the hospital for an asthma attack any comfort that you would take the slightest interest in her. And your passion for devolving power down to states doesn't help us, because our state regulators can't do anything about any of those problems. They all come from out-of-state sources. In this respect, we are very like Delaware. One of the things I'd like to ask you about here is the connection between you and some of these fossil fuel companies. These are some of the companies that have supported you. These are some of the political organizations that you've raised money for. You've raised money for them for Pruitt for Attorney General, correct?
Yes, sir. I have a campaign committee for that, yes.
And Devon Energy, Koch Industries, ExxonMobil have all maxed out to that account.
I'm not aware if they're
various
maxed out or not, Senator, but I'm sure they've given to that committee.
Oklahoma Strong PAC is your leadership PAC?
It was, yes.
It was? And similarly, they gave money, they maxed out to that organization as well, which you control.
I'm unsure about that, Senator.
Okay. Well, they contributed to it.
I'm even unsure about that as well. I haven't looked at that.
You closed your super PAC, Liberty 2.0, but that took fossil fuel contributions as well, correct?
That particular entity has been closed, yes.
Now, you helped raise money for the Republican Attorney General's Association. While you were a member of its executive committee, they received $530,000 from Koch Industries, $350,000 from Murray Energy, $160,000 from ExxonMobil, and $125,000 from Devon Energy, the company whose letter you transposed onto your letterhead and sent as an Oklahoma Attorney General document. Did you solicit, in your role at the Republican Attorney General's Association, any of that funding?
I'm unable to confirm if they gave those numbers, Senator, those amounts. There are
Did you
several members that
solicit
served.
funding from them as in your role at the Republican Attorney General's
I attended
Association?
fundraising events as an Attorney General, along with other Attorneys General, with respect to the RAGA.
And did you solicit? Did you ask them for money for RAGA?
As I indicated, I attended fundraising events with
But that's
respect to this.
different. Attending a fundraising is one thing. Asking them is my question. Did you ask them for money?
I mean, specifically, you would have to ask about certain entities. I don't know. You
Those are
went
the
through entire
entities.
list.
Koch Industries, Murray Energy, ExxonMobil, Devon Energy.
I did not ask of Koch or that, what were the other ones?
Murray Energy, ExxonMobil, Devon Energy.
I have not asked them for money on behalf of RAGA.
And then we have, you said to the chairman that there is nothing that might place you in a conflict of interest that you have not disclosed. Yet you founded the Rule of Law Defense Fund, which is a dark money operation that supports the Republican Attorney General's Association, and you have not disclosed any of your solicitations for that entity, nor have you disclosed what money was raised pursuant to those solicitations. This is an organization that appears to have a $1 million a year budget. So very substantial funds have been solicited. I believe you were its chairman. Will you disclose your role in soliciting money and in receiving money for the Rule of Law Defense Fund pursuant to your solicitations?
Senator, a point of clarification. I actually did not start nor initiate the Rule of Law Defense Fund. That is something I
You
did
led
not
it?
do. I've been an officer of that organization
Okay,
for
an officer of
2016. There's an executive staff, fundraisers that actually carry out the functions of that organization. There are many attorneys general that serve on that board. It's not a decision of one. It's a decision of those that have been empowered to make those decisions.
But you haven't told us anything about that. You haven't told us
I have
who
no
you
access to-
asked money
That's a
from. You haven't told us
501c4.
what they gave if you asked them. It's a complete black hole into which at least $1 million goes, and based on your record of fundraising, it appears that a great deal of your fundraising comes from these organizations who are in the energy sector and devoted to fighting climate change.
Some of whom I've actually sued as well, Senator. But with respect to the Rule of
Name
Law
one you've
Defense,
sued up there.
ExxonMobil,
Really?
yes.
My time has expired. We'll pursue this in further questioning.
Yeah, we're involved in, as I indicated, I think in your office, we are involved in, and Senator Inhofe mentioned it in his comments, a situation in Oklahoma where multiple oil and gas companies, ConocoPhillips and others, have defrauded the state in cleanup with respect to spills that have occurred in ExxonMobil.
Yeah, it's a quitam fraud case. It has nothing to do with the environment.
Senator, I
I
would
think we're going to
respectfully
reserve that
disagree.
for the second round.
Sure, I'm sorry.
Thank
He
you.
was coming back to me, so I was responding.
Thank you. Before heading to Senator Capito, there are two articles I'll be introducing into the record. One from the Wall Street Journal in September, headline, Hillary Clinton raises more than Donald Trump from oil industry. The second article that I'll be introducing for the record is from Politico from December 27th by Elena Shore, who quotes American Rising Executive Director Brian Rogers. Quote, this is a partisan fishing expedition by 6 liberal Democrats who combined have taken more than $1.2 million from far-left environmentalist groups dead set against any reforms to an out-of-control EPA. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Attorney General Pruitt, for being here, for your willingness to throw your hat in the ring to serve. I'd like to quote the ranking member when he says it's hard work, because it is. The EPA is hard work. But one of the things you said really struck me, and I believe that the rule of law does matter. And I'm heartened by your passion for that. The regulatory overreach of the EPA has contributed to economic devastation in my state of West Virginia, in my region. Data from the Mine Safety and Health Administration shows that 60,000 coal jobs have been lost between 2011 and 2016. Thousands of these are in West Virginia. We're in a desperate situation in our state right now because of this. We had a field hearing in Beckley, West Virginia, where our WVU economist, John Deskins, said that the coal industry downturn had resulted in 6 of our southern West Virginia counties being in a Great Depression. For the past 8 years, the EPA has given no indication at all that it cares about the economic impact of its policies, even though Congress has said very clearly in the Clean Air Act and other environmental statutes that we expect jobs and economic factors to be taken into account. That's part of the law. In October, a federal court held that the EPA had failed to evaluate the job impacts of the EPA Clean Air Act as required by 321A of that act, and ordered the EPA to submit a schedule for conducting these the required jobs analysis. Incredibly, the EPA told the court it would take 2 years. This was just just in the last several weeks. It would take 2 years just to come up with a plan on how to do the analysis, which, in my view, if that's part of the law that EPA is supposed to be following, they should already have the protocols set up to do an effective and accurate job analysis. So the court responded like this. This response is wholly inefficient, unacceptable, and unnecessary. It evidences the continued hostility on the part of the EPA to the acceptance of the mission established by Congress. So I would like to ask you to commit to me to ensure that the EPA will follow the law. It is charged with implementing and do those ongoing evaluation of job losses and economic shifts due to the requirements of the Act as required by the law.
Senator, as you indicated, I really believe that it's important that rule of law is adhered to because it inspires confidence in those that are regulated. I think oftentimes those that are regulated don't know what's expected of them. They look at a statute, they see the requirements of the statute, and then those that are regulating act in a way that's not consistent with that framework. And so they don't know what's expected of them, and that causes uncertainty and I think paralysis to a certain degree. So rule of law is something that we should take seriously. It's been at the heart of the litigation that we have initiated as a state. A lot of times these cases, as we were talking earlier with Senator Carper, there's a policy or a political kind of a tension that's drawn to it, but really is about process and rule of law and making sure that the framework that this body, Congress, has established is respected and enforced. And so I appreciate your comments.
Well, in looking for the balance, we need to have at least a correct analysis of what the economic implications are of regulations. It is so important and critically important that we enforce our environmental laws and to keep our air clean and get it cleaner and protect our waters. In January of 2014, a storage tank in Charleston, West Virginia, was corrupted and went into the river. It was right by the water flow of the major water source in my community. 300,000 people had to do without water for several weeks. It caused a lot of angst economically to small businesses. Imagine a restaurant not being able to use water, or you can't, wash your clothes. You couldn't do anything with the water. But also, and I share this concern about the health and the long-range implications of what's happened. Several people, multiple individuals and Freedom Industries have pled guilty to environmental crimes in federal court, which I'm very pleased about. So let's talk about TSCA, because in TSCA I was able to support a provision that would say that if you're storing in close proximity to drinking water, you have to take that into consideration when you're reviewing potentially hazardous chemicals. Can we count on you to work with this committee to make sure that this bipartisan TSCA reform bill is fully implemented and efficiently and fully?
I'm absolutely, Senator. In fact, I would commend the work of this committee with Senator Inhofe's leadership in passing that update to the TSCA legislation. For the first time in history, as you know, the EPA has the ability to order testing to address chemicals that are going to be entered into the stream of commerce, and that's a very big substantive change that exists. There are many deadlines.
And I would also add that in TSCA, excuse me just a minute because I'm running out of time, in TSCA, we actually expanded the EPA's reach. So when you're asked if you're wanting to get rid of the EPA or it doesn't have a value, I voted to expand that reach of EPA to make sure that I have clean water, and then a spill happens in a community around this country, what's happened in Flint, Michigan, doesn't have the far-reaching implications that it does. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Cardin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pruitt, welcome
morning.
to the committee. Thank you for your willingness to serve our country. I want to talk about the Chesapeake Bay program. We talked about that in my office. I explained to you, and I'll do it very quickly, that this is a program that was developed at the state level with the states that are in the watershed, including Delaware, with my colleague, Senator Carper. It's a state that the locals have determined how it's best to reach their pollution targets in order to help preserve the Chesapeake Bay. It's the largest estuary in the Northern Hemisphere. It's critically important. It's complicated. Doesn't flush itself as many bodies of water does. It has a reduction of oyster crops. There's so many problems. All the stakeholders have gotten together. They've worked out a plan. The federal government is part of that plan. It's enforced through the TMDL program, and it has been agreed to by the local governments. It was challenged, the TMDLs, including you joined that lawsuit. The Supreme Court refused to overturn the Court of Appeals supporting the use of the TMDLs. If you are confirmed, will you support the federal role in the Chesapeake Bay program as envisioned by the partners and stakeholders in enforcing the TMDLs if necessary?
Yes, Senator, and as I indicated in our office in our time, at the time that we had together, I really commend the 6 states that joined together to address the Chesapeake Bay and to try to set levels for both point source and non-point source type of discharge into the Chesapeake Bay. There were some concerns about the precedent, the role that EPA was playing initially, but through that litigation, the EPA has acknowledged that their role is more informational, and there was concern in Oklahoma about the Mississippi River Basin and the precedent that was set in that matter, and that's what spawned our litigation. But I really want to emphasize to you, that process represents what should occur. For states to join together and enter into an agreement to address water quality issues and then involve the EPA to serve the role it's supposed to serve is something that should be commended and celebrated. And as it relates to enforcing that TMDL, I can commit to you that, in fact, I will do so.
Part of the federal government's partnership is to provide resources. There are several programs that fund initiatives within the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Probably the largest is the state revolving funds dealing with wastewater. Will you support the federal government's partnership through funding these programs that are critically important to make the advancements in the Chesapeake Bay watershed?
Yes, Senator. I believe that the grant-making role of the EPA, as we talked about in your office, is very important to states across this country, whether it's the revolving funds or the WIFIA portions of our statutes, but grant-making in general is very important, and I would commit to you in that regard that I would do so with respect to the Chesapeake Bay.
I want to continue on clean water for one moment. We've had significant problems with safe drinking water and clean water. Let me ask you a preliminary question. Do you believe there is any safe level of lead that can be taken into the human body, particularly a young person?
Senator, that's something I've not reviewed nor know about. I would be very concerned about any level of lead going into the drinking water or in obviously human consumption, but I've not looked at the scientific research on that.
The Clean Water Act provides for federal guidance as to acceptable clean water. It's enforced by the states. So my question to you in regards to clean water is what steps will you take to make sure that our children are safe? We saw in Flint, Michigan, a tragedy occur. Where do you think the federal government needs to strengthen its regulatory roles to make sure that our children are safe from lead?
Well, I think with Flint, Michigan, it's an example of not a delay in response by the EPA. There should have been more done on corrosion control programs with the Flint, Michigan system. As you know, under the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act, if there's an emergency situation, the EPA can enter an emergency order to address those kinds of concerns. I think there should have been a more fast response, a more rapid response to Flint, Michigan. I think with respect to water quality, it is infrastructure. Water infrastructure is important. And as you indicated, the states play a very vital role in that process, and there needs to be more cooperation between the EPA and the states to ensure water quality is protected.
Just so I understand it, you have participated in several lawsuits against the EPA's involvement, saying that the locals should have the responsibility. If you are confirmed, will you support federal enforcement, particularly in multi-state issues, where the only way we can get enforcement is at the federal level?
I believe that is a vital role of the EPA, as I've indicated in your office, with air quality, water quality, issues that cross state line. There is an enforcement mechanism that is important and would seek to do so if confirmed as EPA administrator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cardin. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Pruitt, for being here today, but also for accepting the nomination. It is a service and a sacrifice, not just for you, but for your family as well, to step forward to serve this country. So thank you, sir, for
Thank you, Senator.
being willing to do that. For your testimony, I do thank you. And I'd like to, first of all, let you know that Nebraskans, they've been really affected by the EPA in many instances, and I will give you some examples of that. Nebraska's public power utilities are grappling with how they could ever comply with the EPA's carbon emission reduction mandates. The city of Omaha is struggling with the agency's expensive CSO mandate and drinking water affordability. Nebraska farmers are waiting on new crop technology products that are stuck in a broken regulatory process. Our biofuel investors and producers are desperate for certainty under the RFS. Home builders, transportation stakeholders, and local county officials are concerned about the jurisdictional expansion to control our state's water resources. Communities and small business owners fear that the EPA's ozone mandate will stunt potential economic development and growth in our state. As a result of the activist role the EPA has played for the past 8 years, families are concerned about the futures of their livelihood. We all want clean air, and we all want clean water. That is one point that I know each and every person here agrees on. But with the EPA's tremendous impact on Americans' lives, each and every day, it is important that the agency be open, transparent, and answerable for its actions. Given these concerns, along with the many others that have been and will continue to be discussed today, what steps will you take as the EPA administrator to provide relief for American families that are faced truly with an onslaught of EPA rules?
Senator, you mentioned open, transparent rulemaking. There are concerns that have been expressed recently with respect to regulation through litigation, where groups initiate litigation against the EPA and the United States government and set environmental policy through something called a sue and settle process. I think this body, as well as the U.S. House, have looked at those kinds of issues. And when we talk about open transparency, there's a reason why the Administrative Procedures Act exists. It is intended to provide notice to those that are going to be impacted with rules, to give them the opportunity to offer comment, and to inform the regulators on the impact of those rules. And then it's the obligation of the regulator to take those things into consideration in finalizing rules. Otherwise, they act in an arbitrary and capricious way. And so it's very important that that process be adhered to give voice to all Americans in balancing the environmental objectives we have, but also the economic harm that results. And the Supreme Court has spoke about that rather consistently of late, and I would seek to lead the EPA in such a way to ensure that openness and transparency.
You know, a couple weeks ago, we had I felt a very good conversation about our shared vision for the EPA to bring common sense and accountability back to that agency. And I think that's going to go a long way in restoring confidence in the agency by the American people. One issue we did discuss was the renewable fuel standard and its importance to my home state of Nebraska. We are the largest ethanol producer west of the Missouri River. Our neighbors to the east, Senator Ernst's home state, they do lead the nation in ethanol production. So honoring the congressionally mandated timelines and the volume requirements that are critical from an investment point of view and also from a planning perspective, I think that this is especially relevant, and especially during the current farm crisis that we are seeing and the negative impact on people in agriculture all across this nation. In our meeting, you did express your commitment to me to honor the law, and you echoed President-elect Trump's support for the statute itself and a strong RVO. And for the record, can you please once again express your commitment to uphold the congressional intent of the RFS?
Yes, Senator, and you said it well, to honor the intent and the expression of the Renewable Fuel Standard statute is very, very important. It's not the job of the administrator of the EPA to do anything other than administer the program according to the intent of Congress, and I commit to you to do so.
And you
and
also,
the waiver, and I would say this, the waivers that routinely are offered by the administrator. Recently, another waiver was offered. It should be used judiciously. There's a reason why Congress put in that statute those statutory objectives. The market has changed since 2005, and the waiver authority that's been provided by this body is important, but that waiver authority should be used judiciously, and the act should be complied with and enforced consistent with the will of Congress.
Thank you, sir, and I would ask that you also tell us publicly what you told us, that you will honor the timelines on the volume levels that are mandated by Congress as well.
Yes, yes.
Thank
Senator.
you very much.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Merkley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over a number of years, information started pouring into EPA that the estimate of the amount of fugitive methane escaping in gas and oil drilling been deeply underestimated. In 2011, the EPA put out its best estimates based on the information that was being presented. And this is relevant because methane is a global warming gas more potent than CO2. Gas companies didn't like this because, well, it presented a vision of natural gas being more damaging environmentally than folks had previously understood. Devon Energy is one of the groups that sought to cast doubt on this scientific information, and they came to you to be their spokesperson, and they asked, will you be our mouthpiece in casting doubt and send a letter we have drafted to the EPA? And you sent that letter. And I just want to ask, first, are you aware that methane is approximately 30 times more potent than carbon dioxide as a global warming gas?
I am, Senator.
Thank you.
The impact on human health.
That's the answer. Yes, thank you. It's a yes, no question. And on a 1 to 10 scale, how concerned are you about the impacts of fugitive methane in driving global warming?
Methane, as you indicated, has
1 to 10
impact.
scale, highly, 10, very, very concerned, or 1, not so concerned?
The quantities of methane in the atmosphere compared to CO2 is less, but it's far more potent, and it is.
Are you concerned? I'm asking about your level of concern.
Yes.
Highly concerned?
I'm concerned.
Thank you. Do you acknowledge sending this letter to the EPA in October 2011?
Senator, that is a letter that's on my letterhead that was sent to the EPA, yes, with respect to the
Do you
issue.
acknowledge that 97% of the words in that letter came directly from Devon Energy?
You know, I've not looked at the percentages, Senator.
The statement that's been analyzed many times is that all of the 1,016 words, except for 37 words, were written directly by Devon Energy
Senator, that was a step that was taken as Attorney General representing the interest of our state. Over 25%
Yes,
of our
so
budget.
I'm not going to ask that question. I was just asking if you copied the letter virtually word for word. You've acknowledged that, yes, it's in the record. People can count it. It's correct. All right. So a public office is about serving the public. There is a public concern over the impact of methane on global warming. There is scientific research showing that it's far more devastating than anticipated and far more is leaking than, but you used your office as a direct extension of an oil company rather than a direct extension of the interests of the public health of the people of Oklahoma. Do you acknowledge that you presented a private oil company's position rather than a position developed by the people of Oklahoma?
Senator, with respect, I disagree. The efforts that I took as Attorney General were representing the interest of the state of Oklahoma.
Earlier you
And
said
there was a concern about-
no, excuse me, I'm asking the questions. You said earlier you listened to everyone. In drafting this letter, you took an oil company's position, and then without consulting people who had diverse views about the impact, you sent it off. How can you present that as representing the people of Oklahoma when you simply only consulted an oil company to push its own point of view for its private profit?
Senator, there's an obligation the EPA has to follow processes as established by this body. The cost-benefit analysis under Section 112 is something that they have to engage in. There was a concern about the overestimated percentages that the EPA put in the record. It was a record-based challenge. That was the expression of the letter to the EPA, and it was representing the interest of an industry in the state of Oklahoma, not a company, an industry.
So my question was, what other groups, environmental groups or other groups, did you consult so that you had that full perspective before representing simply a for-profit oil company using your official office and your official letterhead?
I consulted with other environmental officials in Oklahoma that regulate that industry and learned from them with respect to the concerns about the estimates that were provided by the EPA.
Can you provide this committee with information showing who you consulted in representing this letter specifically for Devon Energy? Because the information that's in the public realm only shows that they simply sent you a letter, asked you to send it, and you sent it without questions.
We have 7 or so individuals in our office that are involved in these kinds of issues, and we will collect the information they have and provide it to this body pursuant to the chairman's direction.
Your staff expanded substantially while you were in charge to 251 staff members. Why do you need an outside oil company to draft a letter when you have 250 people working for you?
Senator, as I've indicated, that was an effort that was protecting the state's interest and making sure that we made the voices of all Oklahomans heard on a very important industry to our state.
You said it all heard, but you only sent it on behalf of a single voice, the oil company. Thank you.
I still have some time remaining for my questioning. Is there anything you'd like to add that you haven't felt you've had a chance in terms of answering fully some of the areas of the questioning?
I mean, I think, Senator, the clarification that the letter that was sent to the EPA was not sent on behalf of any one company. This was not particular to Devon Energy, not particular to Chesapeake, not particular to other companies in our state. It was particular to an industry. The state of Oklahoma has an oil and gas industry that is vibrant to our state, as you might imagine, just like many of you have industry in your state. There was concern expressed by that industry, many folks in that industry, about the overestimating that occurred with that methane rule. That was the communication to the EPA. It was a position of the state, not the position of any one company.
Thank you. Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you very much. General Pruitt, welcome to the committee. Thank you for your public service. I'm going to see if I can get through 3 areas in the 5 minutes that I have. First of all, WOTUS, Waters of the United States. Despite there being an injunction against the enforcement of the WOTUS rule, I'm told that EPA Region 7, the region in which Kansas is part, those regional inspectors have increased their inspection of smaller animal feeding operations. Unlike many states, Kansas has a well-established state permit system for small facilities, as well as the delegated authority under the Clean Water Act. Rather than coordinate, the EPA, rather than coordinating with the state agency, the EPA is engaged in its own inspections and its own enforcement on these small facilities, often conflicting with state permitting in the enforcement process. In these actions, the EPA has claimed jurisdiction over features like grass waterways, culverts under county roads, unconnected to the feeding operation, and not situated in or near any body of water. General Pruitt, what would your direction be to the EPA staff, to Region 7 and others, in regard to their actions enforcing WOTUS while an injunction is in place?
Well, Senator, as you indicated, and I do want to acknowledge the same concerns have been expressed by those individuals in Oklahoma and different groups with respect to the WOTUS definition that has been offered by the EPA that is subject to a 31-state challenge that was consolidated there before the Sixth Circuit. And as you indicated, there has been a stay of enforcement against that particular rule. Supreme Court actually last Friday took up a matter of jurisdiction on that case, so that adds some complexity to this. But I think the role of the EPA prospectively is to seek to provide clarity on what the true definition, what the best definition is with respect to waters in the United States. As you know, there's much flexibility and discretion there given to the EPA, and a series of cases that lead up to the Rapanos decision that haven't provided a tremendous amount of clarity. The best thing the EPA can do going forward is to reestablish that clarity so that states and individuals know what's expected of them in compliance.
General, thank you. I don't think I need to remind you in particular about the role that states play in clean water. But I would take a moment to highlight something that is often, I think, forgotten in the regulatory world of water quality, is the Department of Agriculture, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, in which landowners are assisted through the Department of Agriculture in improving water quality and water quantity in a very partnership-oriented local effort that is significantly different than the tremendous reach from the EPA in Washington, D.C. as compared to the local efforts by landowners themselves to work with USDA to solve problems. Let me move to my second question. It revolves the Flint Hills. That's a native grassland in our state. The owners of those grasslands, these are thousands of acres of grass, they burn the prairie in the early spring for purposes of regeneration of that grass. It is learned from the Indians that lightning used to be the method by which that grassland burned, less so now with the settlement that have occurred of our country. And as a result of that annual burning that is ecologically desirable, there is times in which a city, even one of our own, Wichita, for example, is no longer in the is then a non-attainment under the Clean Air Act. And I raise this issue to you in asking that you work, if you are confirmed, you work with the state of Kansas in our local efforts to manage the burning of the national grasslands in a way that is advantageous to wildlife habitat, at the same time is done in a timely fashion at appropriate times in appropriate amounts that preserves the air quality. But again, not a heavy-handed approach that one-size solution or a ban fits the circumstance.
If confirmed, Senator, I look forward to working with you on that issue.
I thank you for that. And finally, I want to highlight a small town in Kansas named Pretty Prairie, a typical name or a perfect name for a town in our state. Pretty Prairie, Kansas is a population of about 700 people. For several decades, because of the need because of high nitrates in the city's water levels, I didn't say that very well, because of high levels of nitrate in the city water system, the city has provided free bottled water to its citizens. And my question to you is, now the EPA is disallowing that practice and requiring the city to spend approximately $2.4 million and raise the rates of our residents of that community by $80 a month, while the community seemingly is satisfied with the solution of the city providing an alternative to the expense of a new water treatment plant. I ask this question as an example of where a rigid decision as compared to a community-based decision seems to prevail at the EPA, and would give you an opportunity to confirm to me what I hope you would say is that you will work with communities. You as an Oklahoman, me as a Kansan, and many of the members of this committee represent lots of communities in which the population is insufficient to be able to pay for the costs of water or sewer treatment. We need financial resources to accomplish that, but we also need common sense solutions to the problem.
Senator, I look forward to working with you on that issue as well as the other. There's a saying in the environmental space, national standards, neighborhood solutions. And I think it's important for the EPA administrator, those in Washington, to learn, as I said in my opening statement, to listen and learn from you with respect to the needs of your community and your state, and collaborate with you and the local officials to achieve good outcomes.
I look forward to educating you on behalf of Kansans.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Booker.
Good morning, Mr. Pruitt.
Good morning, Senator Booker.
I have a letter that I read that you sent to the committee last year, and you said that the Oklahoma Attorney General, you said, I am responsible for protecting the welfare of Oklahoma citizens. I assume that's still correct, and you believe that?
Yes, Senator.
And during the past 6 years in pursuit of that, if you look at the record of the lawsuits you filed against the EPA, you've joined or filed 14 lawsuits against the EPA challenging clean air and clean water rules, yes?
We've been involved in multiple pieces of litigation, Senator.
Yeah, but I'm looking at specifically 14, and Mr. Chairman, I'd like to put those 14 lawsuits into the record of where you specifically challenged the EPA on air quality. And let me just go through some of those.
Without objection.
Thank you, sir. To refresh your recollection, you filed 2 lawsuits challenging the EPA mercury and air toxics standards. You filed a lawsuit challenging the EPA's 2015 National Ambient Air Quality Standards for ozone. You filed 4 lawsuits challenging the EPA's Clean Power Plan. You have sued to challenge the EPA's 111B standards for carbon dioxide emissions from new power plants. And you also sued to challenge the EPA's federal implementation plan for Oklahoma under the regional haze rule. You're familiar with those, I imagine.
Yes, Senator.
And you filed a lawsuit challenging the EPA cross-state air pollution rule, something in New Jersey we're very concerned with. And are you aware that that rule, which you lost in that suit, scientists estimate that that alone prevents 400,000 asthma attacks nationally each year? Are you aware of those estimations?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Senator. May I offer?
I appreciate your promotion being a judge. Let me continue, Mr. Pruitt. I don't have much time.
Okay.
So each of these lawsuits that I just went through and that we analyzed, all of them challenge attempts by the EPA to reduce air pollution. In all of them except one, you filed those lawsuits joining with polluting companies that were also suing the EPA. And so in addition to filing those lawsuits with some of the polluting companies, or at least one that has now been specifically mentioned by two of my colleagues, you used substantial portions of the letters from those companies, put them on your official Attorney General letterhead. And what was sort of surprising to me is that when you've been asked about this in the public, you basically represented that that's actually called representative government in my view of the world. Your testimony here says that you were representing industry, you were representing the polluters. And so with all of these lawsuits you filed and with all of these letters like this one written to the EPA on behalf of the industries that are causing the pollution, it seems clear to me that obviously the fact pattern on representing polluters is clear, that you've worked very hard on behalf of these industries that have their profits externalized, negative externalities are their pollution. And so I just have a question for you specifically about the children of Oklahoma. Do you know how many kids in Oklahoma roughly have asthma?
I do not, Senator.
Well, according to data published by the very nonpartisan group, the American Lung Association, more than 111,000 children in Oklahoma, which is more than 10%, more than 1 in 10 of all the kids in Oklahoma have asthma. That's one of the highest asthma rates in the entire United States of America. Now, this is a crisis, similar data for where I was mayor, and I can tell you firsthand the devastating impacts that kids with asthma has on children and families, affecting their economic well-being, parents who have to watch their children struggle to breathe, people that have to miss work, rushing their kids to the hospital. 1 in 10 kids having a disease, missing school, is a significant problem. And so if you've been writing letters on behalf of polluting industries, I want to ask you, how many letters did you write to the EPA about this health crisis? If this is representative government, did you represent those children? I want to know what actions you've taken in the past 6 years in your capacity as protector of the welfare of Oklahoma citizens to protect the welfare of those 111,000 children. Did you ever let any of them write letters on your letterhead to the EPA, and did you even file one lawsuit on behalf of those kids to reduce the air pollution in your state and help them to have a healthy life?
Senator, I've actually provided a list of cases to the chairman with respect to enforcement steps we've taken in multiple pieces of environmental litigation. But let me say to you, with respect to cross-state air pollution and some of the cases you referred to, the state has to have an interest before it can bring those cases, as you know. You can't just bring a lawsuit if you don't have standing, if there's not been some injury to the state of Oklahoma. In each of those cases, the court
my
determined that there
time's
was a state
expired, but if I could just say, injury, clearly asthma is triggered and caused by air pollutants. Clearly there is an air pollution problem. And the fact that you have not brought suits at any of the level in which you've represented the industries that are causing the pollution is really problematic when you're going to sit in a position that is nationally supposed to be affecting this reality. And asthma in our country is the #1 reason why children in America, health reason, why children in America miss school. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd submit for the record first an article from the Tulsa World from Scott Thompson. The headline is EPA will be in good hands with Scott Pruitt. Scott Thompson is the executive director of the Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality. Talks about the excellent work done and ends with the quote, EPA will be in good hands with Scott Pruitt. I would point out that between 2004 and 2008, and we'll submit this for the record, the most recent employers of Obama administration's senior EPA officials sued the EPA with 12 lawsuits at least in the time that when George W. Bush was in his second term. That included Lisa Jackson, Assistant Administrator Cynthia Giles, Gina McCarthy, and Stephen Owens. They were petitioners and plaintiffs filing suits against the EPA. And finally, I'll submit an editorial to point out that this one back to the Tulsa World. Over the past 6 years, Pruitt's legal team has consistently shown deference to the legal expertise and professionals at DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality. This was written by the executive director. More importantly, he said, I cannot recall an instance where they did not allow us to pursue legal action when deemed necessary. And then finally from Mike Turpin, who is the former chairman of the Oklahoma Democratic Party, says the job of the EPA is the essential mission of guaranteeing clean air and clean water. Pruitt has never compromised those critical components of a healthy population with any actions he has taken. Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Attorney General Pruitt.
Thank you, Senator Rounds.
I noticed that you didn't have the opportunity in the time allotted for Senator Booker's question. Would you care to finish your response with regard to the role that the states have and their ability to either participate in a suit and whether or not they have standing? Would you like to finish your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Senator. And Senator, as I indicated in our office, in your office, when we spent time together, the enforcement role in the state of Oklahoma is different than other states. With respect to the Department of Environmental Quality, the Oklahoma Water Resources Board, we have multiple agencies, Department of Agriculture, that have frontline enforcement authority with respect to our environmental laws. The role that we play in my office largely is a general counsel role. We provide guidance and direction to those agencies. There are many cases we have initiated in conjunction with them, but mainly those agencies enforce actions at their level. Many of those agencies have dozens of attorneys on their staff, and a general counsel in their own right bring those enforcement actions. You mentioned several of the cases, from MATS to cross-state air pollution and the rest. I believe that the cross-state air pollution rule is a very important statute that EPA should enforce. I believe that if there's downwind states that are contributing to non-attainment and upwind states that are contributing to non-attainment and downwind states, that there should be responsibility for those states. We have that issue with Texas at times. And so the lawsuit was not questioning the authority of the EPA to regulate under the cross-state air pollution rule. It was more that they were trying to assess damages against certain states that were in excess of their allocated share. So each of those cases, I would ask you to remember, I'm an advocate in behalf of the state of Oklahoma. There's a state's interest, as Senator Rounds indicated, that has to be in play. To say that any of those cases is about any one company is just simply not right. There's no parens patria standing that I have as Attorney General to bring a case on behalf of a private citizen or a company. There has to be a standing, an injury to the state's interest to bring those cases. And so I would ask you to consider that as we go through those cases that you mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Senator Rounds.
Thank you, and thank you, sir, for your response, your complete response. Also, as the chairman of the subcommittee on oversight of the Environmental Protection Agency, I've had the opportunity to look at their basis or the way that they make their decisions known and the logic they use in getting to those decisions. We had a chance to talk about it in my office the other day, and one of the items that I brought up was the fact that we actually had received comments from the Small Business Administration Office of Advocacy, a copy of which I've gotten, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have put into the record. Thank you. And with this was a letter that was sent to the EPA in October of 2014 requesting that the EPA withdraw the proposed Waters of the U.S. rule, the WOTUS rule, and reevaluate the impacts the rule would have on American small business. Now, this is a federal agency requesting the EPA take a second look at a proposed rule. The EPA refused this request and issued the final rule that we have today. What are your thoughts on this? And would you, if you are approved and become the next administrator of the EPA, would you take a second look at whether or not they had a valid reason for having the Waters of the U.S. rule considered again?
I think, Senator, the response of the Sixth Circuit and where we are presently with the litigation, there's definitely a need to address that on a prospective basis. Historically, as you know, under the Clean Water Act, and even before the Clean Water was passed, the waters of the United States equaled navigable waters, navigable in fact waters. We know from a couple of cases that led up to the most recent case, Rapanos, that the Clean Water Act, it's something more than navigable in fact, but what that more is has to be determined and assessed. And so, as I indicated earlier to another senator's question, the most important thing is to provide certainty, to make sure that the Clean Water Act helps those at the state level know where the boundaries are of where they have jurisdiction and where they don't, so that we can have regulations that are fair and equitable and uncertainty is not created.
In the lawsuits that you've brought against the Environmental Protection Agency on behalf of the state of Oklahoma, would it be fair to say that a number of those are based upon the Environmental Protection Agency failing to follow its own rules in the promulgation of those rules?
Yes, Senator. I think whether it's the MATS case or the Clean Power Plan case or the WOTUS case or a multitude of cases, the courts have agreed that the EPA has exceeded its authority, that the EPA has not acted within the framework that Congress has established in performing the role that it's supposed to perform. And that's the reason I mentioned in my opening statement that process matters, rule of law matters, federalism matters. And those issues matter because Congress has said so. It is Congress who gives authority to the EPA. The EPA is an administrative agency, is not a legislative body. And so it's important for that agency to act within the framework, within the substantive authority that Congress has provided it in doing its job. In leading the EPA, if confirmed, I think if I do that effectively, it will provide confidence, certainty to those that are regulated, to know what's expected of them, and improve our air and improve our water because of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Round. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This morning, NOAA, NASA has declared 2016 the hottest year in the 137-year-old record that has been kept. Donald Trump has called global warming a hoax caused by the Chinese. Do you agree that global warming is a hoax?
I do not, Senator.
So Donald Trump is wrong?
I do not believe that climate change is a hoax.
Okay, that's important for the President to hear. Mr. Pruitt, you've made a career working on behalf of the fossil fuel industry to eviscerate regulations designed to protect public health and the environment. You have sued the EPA 19 times to stop clean air and water protections. 8 of those cases are still ongoing, including your litigation that challenges critical rules that reduce levels of hazardous smog, mercury, and carbon pollution. As EPA administrator, you would be in a position to serve as plaintiff, defendant, judge, and jury on these ongoing 8 lawsuits, and that would be wrong. In your ethics agreement, you have said that you would not participate in any matter that is ongoing litigation within 1 year. But, Mr. Pruitt, isn't it correct that these lawsuits may very well continue for much longer than 1 year?
Well, Senator, I have the letter from the Ethics Council at the EPA, and the one-year time period is intended to address covered entities, entities that I served in a chairmanship or a officer capacity. The Southern Theological Seminary, the Windows Ministry, those entities are covered entities. So if there is a matter that arises before the EPA within a one-year period, a particular matter, a specific case that involves those entities, then the recusal would be in order. But that's really the focus of the one-year timeline.
Will you agree to recuse yourself from those lawsuits which you brought as the Attorney General of Oklahoma against the EPA, not just for 1 year, but for the entirety of the time that you are the administrator of the EPA? Will you commit to doing that?
Senator, for clarity, I think that it's important to note that the one-year time period, again, is for those covered entities that were highlighted in the EPA letter. With respect to pending litigation, the EPA Ethics Council has indicated with respect to particular matters and specific parties, there will be an opportunity to get counsel from the EPA at that point to determine what steps could be taken to avoid appearances of impropriety.
So you will not are you saying that you will not recuse yourself from the actual matters which you're suing the EPA on right now as Attorney General of Oklahoma for the time that you are the head of the EPA?
I'm not saying that at all, Senator.
You are saying that. Will you recuse yourself?
I'm saying that the EPA Ethics Council has indicated those cases will require a review by the EPA Ethics Council, and if it involves a particular matter with a specific party, then recusal would potentially be in order, and I would follow the guidance and counsel of EPA
I just think
Ethics.
this is a clear line for the American public, given your record from Oklahoma in suing the EPA on all of these matters, that if you don't agree to recuse yourself, then again, you become plaintiff, defendant, judge, and jury on the cases that you're bringing right now as Attorney General of Oklahoma against the EPA. And that the EPA is for all of the people of the United States, not just the fossil fuel industry of Oklahoma. So you're not committing, and I think that's a big mistake, Mr. Pruitt, to recuse yourself from those cases. It is critical. And moreover, you also are in a position to initiate regulations that could overturn smog protections, carbon pollution protections that are right now on the books that you are suing as Attorney General of Oklahoma to overturn. Would you commit to not promulgating new regulations in any of the areas where you right now are suing the EPA? Would you make a commitment that you would recuse yourself from doing that?
Let me be clear, Senator, because we talked about this in your office and very much enjoyed the conversation we had there in addition to this area that we talked about. I have every willingness and desire to recuse as directed by EPA Ethics Council. And if directed to do so, I will in fact do so, to recuse from those cases. There is a difference, as you know, between pending litigation, a particular matter, with specific parties, and prospective rulemaking. Rulemaking goes through a process.
Look, what the American people are expecting here is the EPA doesn't turn into every polluter's ally. The only way to ensure that is for you to recuse yourself from the cases that you have brought, because most of them are to overturn the clean air, clean water, smog regulations. So to create an appearance of independence, it's critical that you recuse yourself.
And I will recuse,
otherwise, honestly, people are going to think that it's not just the fox guarding the hen house, it's the fox destroying the hen house, because you haven't distanced yourself from the actual litigation that you have initiated on most of the key issues that you are now going to have responsibility for protecting in terms of the public health of the entire country.
And Senator, I can say to you unequivocally, I will recuse as directed by EPA Ethics Council.
And I'm saying to you is that you should just start out saying, I'm going to recuse myself from anything that relates to any litigation that I have initiated as the Attorney General of Oklahoma that questions the clean air, clean water, climate change, or smog, or mercury protections, which are right now on the books that the EPA is honored to protect. And if you don't do that, then we're going to have a fundamental conflict of interest that is presented by your presence as the administrator of the EPA. It just gets down to being a matter as simple as that.
The senator's time has expired. Thank you, Senator Markey. For clarification, will you fully follow the advice of the EPA Ethics Council?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Just for an additional clarification regarding conflicts of interest, I note the letter to this committee on January 4th, and I'm submitting to the record, this is the Office of Government Ethics, believe that this nominee is in compliance with applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest. And then there was a letter yesterday from Walter Schaub, Director, Office of Government Ethics, responding to a letter from Senator Carper and other EPW Democrats regarding Attorney General Pruitt and potential conflicts of interest. And they say, if the Office of Government Ethics has transmitted a certified financial disclosure report and an ethics agreement to the Senate, which they have, it means the Office of Government Ethics is satisfied that all financial conflicts of interest have been identified and resolved. Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Attorney General Pruitt, for appearing in front of us today. I enjoyed our conversation, both one-on-one and then in a group setting as well. And I would like to go back and revisit our discussion on the RFS. As you know, Iowa is home to 43 ethanol refineries. We are the largest producer of ethanol west or east of the Missouri River. President-elect Trump reiterated his support for biofuels while he was campaigning across Iowa and all across the Midwest. And those areas of the country overwhelmingly supported his candidacy and led to his victory. And thank you for stating once again that you would honor his commitment to biofuels by carrying out the RFS as intended by Congress. Policy certainty is key for economic growth, and this is something that we discussed in my office. Unfortunately, as a result of uncertainty surrounding the EPA's renewable fuel volume targets in 2014, 2015, and 2016, second-generation biofuel investment decreased and proposed projects moved overseas. Fortunately, the EPA has recently changed its course and released updated volume targets for the RFS that meet the levels prescribed by Congress. If confirmed as administrator, what will you do to continue to provide certainty so that investment can continue to happen right here at home in the United States?
You know, Senator, as you indicated in our meeting, the importance of the infrastructure, the investment that has occurred in reliance upon the law that was passed in 2005 and updated in 2007. And as I indicated earlier to Senator Fisher's question, the latitude discretion that has been given to the EPA administrator with respect to waiving those statutory targets should be judiciously used. It shouldn't be automatic. It should be something that the EPA administrator seeks to comply with and adhere to because of the will of this body. And so I think those waivers obviously are in order, but with respect to market conditions, we have less consumption today, more fuel-efficient vehicles. Market conditions have changed since 2005, but despite that, the EPA administrator should not use that to undermine or to somehow put into question the commitments made by this body in the Renewable Fuel Standards statute.
Thank you for your commitment to the RFS and the intention of Congress. I also want to touch on an issue you mentioned in your testimony, which is the level of fear and distrust many folks have of the EPA. When I'm home in Iowa, I host town halls all across the state and just want to hear what's going on in their communities. And what I hear without fail at these town halls is that folks are frustrated with the EPA and the gotcha mentality that has stemmed from the agency. My constituents tell me the EPA is out to get them rather than work with them, and there is a huge lack of trust between many of my constituents and the EPA. And if we take a look specifically at the WOTUS rule, Iowans truly feel that the EPA ignored their comments and concerns, threw them under the rug, and then just moved forward. We know now that the EPA relied on gimmicky mass emails and social media events to prop up their message, and then they used those tactics to insinuate that anyone who had reasonable concerns about the WOTUS rule are somehow in favor of dirty water, which is absolutely ridiculous. And this type of culture that was created under the Obama administration has no place here. So, Mr. Pruitt, what do you plan to do in your first days as the administrator to improve the relationships EPA has with the hardworking folks across the country?
Well, Senator, as I indicated in my opening statement, this paradigm that we live within today, that if you're pro-energy, you're anti-environment, if you're pro-environment, you're anti-energy, is something that I think is just a false narrative. We can do better than that. In fact, this country has shown for decades that we can grow our economy and be a good steward of our air, land, and water, and we need to get back to that. Cooperative federalism is at the heart of many of the environmental statutes that have been passed by this body. And the reason for that is it's the states, many times, that have the resources, the expertise, and understanding what the unique challenges are for the environment and improving our water and don't care about it. Senator Whitehouse indicated a devolution of authority to the states would create a problem. That's not what I'm advocating, and I think we hear in the marketplace, we need a partnership, a true partnership between the EPA and performing its role along with the states in performing theirs. And if we have that partnership as opposed to punishment, as opposed to uncertainty and duress that we currently see in the marketplace, I think we'll have better air, better water quality as a result.
Thank you. I look forward to that partnership and transparency. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you. Mr. Pruitt, I want to clarify your response to Senator Ertz on this whole congressional intent when it comes to the RFS. What I want to know, and what the people of Illinois, we are also a great producer of ethanol. What we need to know is where exactly you stand on the RFS. Are you the Attorney General who only 3 years ago sided with big oil to slam the RFS? You, and I quote, said that RFS was unworkable, and also that it was a flawed program. So I'm a little confused of what you're saying today, because are you that Mr. Pruitt, or are you the Scott Pruitt today who's saying all the right things in this confirmation hearing and in these meetings to try to reassure pro-RFS states by repeating nice-sounding but ultimately vague and hollow mantra that if confirmed, you would enforce the RFS law as written by Congress? As you and I are quite well aware of, such a statement essentially dodges the critical issue for biofuels producers and workers, because under the law, the EPA has considerable discretion to adjust the renewable volume obligation in a manner that you would argue is contrary to congressional intent, yet may be compliant with the explicit letter of the statute. So as EPA administrator, you could still technically be in compliance with Congress, with the law, but actually be working against it. And your answers today have not clarified that. So my question to you, Mr. Pruitt, is this. Which specific actions has EPA taken since 2007 while administering the RFS that you, in your view, are not consistent with congressional intent? Can you name any?
Thank you, Senator. The administrator and the EPA routinely misses the statutory targets and publishing those each year, creating great uncertainty in the marketplace. In fact, in some years, they've missed the timeline as far as submitting those targets by over a year. In some cases, over 2 years.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. Yes or no? Do you believe that Congress intended for the RFS to increase the amount of renewable fuel blended in our nation's liquid transportation fuel supply? Yes or no?
Without question.
Without question. Yes. All right. My second question then is yes or no, do you believe Congress intended for the RFS to be a stable policy that drives private investment in the renewable energy industry?
Yes.
And finally, if confirmed, will you commit to opposing any and all proposals to move the point of obligation under the RFS program from refiners to blenders?
Senator, as you know, the EPA is actually involved in a comment period on that very issue, and to prejudge the outcome of that, I think would be, I would not be able to do that. There are many aspects of the program, from the trading program, the monitoring of fraud in the system, that need to be better administrated by the EPA. These have been administration issues. The EPA has created uncertainty. We talked about a minute ago with the Senator about the amount of investment that's gone into the infrastructure because of the 2005 law. Those individuals need to have certainty and confidence that the RF is going to be enforced and administered pursuant to the desires of Congress.
Right, but if you were to do that, then you would actually have to answer, yes, because to move the RFS program from refiners to blenders is actually one of those ways that you can actually undermine the RFS standards as intended by Congress, which you yourself just now said was intended to increase the amount of biofuels blended into the fuel supply of the United States. This is my problem. On the one hand, your entire track record shows you to be someone who opposes the RFS, and yet here in front of Congress and in meetings with senators, you are giving these vague answers that sound right when it comes to the RFS, but really opens all sorts of back doors for you to oppose the renewable fuel standard. And that is very troublesome because all across the Midwest, you know, for those of us who have fought to strengthen national security by lessening our country's dangerous dependence on foreign oil, I'm really incredibly concerned about the future of the RFS and American-produced biofuels under a Scott Pruitt-led EPA. And I'm also incredibly concerned about what you're going to do in terms of protecting the environment. In your answer to one of my colleagues about what the role of the EPA is, what is the job of the EPA, one of the first questions you got, you spent 5 minutes talking before you actually said, protect the environment. You talked all about reducing EPA's influence over states for a good 5 minutes before you actually got to the environment. And then for my farmers, my corn and soybean producers, for my biofuel industry, the RFS is critical in order to continue that. And I would rather burn American-made, American-grown corn and soybean in my gas tank than I would oil from the Middle East. I've already been to a war fought over oil in the Middle East, and I don't intend to allow us to continue to do that, which is why the RFS is so critical, not just for the jobs in Illinois, not just to support our Illinois agriculture, but for our national security when it comes to where we're going to get our energy supply. I'm out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth.
If I may, Senator, let me say to you, the role of the administrator of the EPA is to enforce and administer the RFS program to carry out the objectives of that statute. Those targets that have been put in that statute by this body need to be respected. The discretion authority, the waiver authority of the administrator needs to be judiciously used to address those concerns that we've talked about. And so I don't want you to have any concern about the intent, objective, or will, if confirmed, of carrying out the RFS mandate or the statute in whole.
That very answer concerns me because you've not actually said that you're going to stick with it.
I'd like to submit for the record, one, a letter from the American Farm Bureau Federation, which strongly supports the nomination of Scott Pruitt as administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and urges a vote in favor of his confirmation. The second is a letter from the Democrat Attorney General of the state of Arkansas, former Democrat Attorney General Dustin McDaniel, who has this to say about Attorney General Scott Pruitt's work on the stem phosphorus levels in the Illinois River watershed. He said, recent press accounts regarding these efforts unfairly mischaracterized the work that was done by General Pruitt and his team. He was a staunch defender of sound science and good policy as appropriate tools to protect the environment of his state. I saw firsthand how General Pruitt was able to bridge political divides and manage multiple agency agendas to reach an outcome that was heralded by most credible observers as both positive and historic. Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Attorney General Pruitt, for your willingness to serve and your family. I think everybody at the dais here realizes that these really are family affairs that truly affect everyone. In recent years, EPA has made it increasingly difficult for Arkansas to manage its delegated national pollutant discharge elimination system. Too often, the permits, rulemakings, or other actions sent to EPA for review are returned with demands far more restrictive, additional expensive data collections required, and other costly onerous requirements. New leadership at EPA has an opportunity to correct this coercive federalism and instead restore cooperative federalism as intended. The states have the expertise and local knowledge necessary to administer environmental programs. Mr. Pruitt, EPA has the opportunity to play a significant role in supporting a move back to cooperative federalism. Can you please explain how you plan to change the EPA state dynamic? My experience with EPA and being on transportation in the House, being ranking member on water there, ranking member in the Senate is, the EPA their attitude is, we're with you unless you come out with a finding that is contrary, and then we're going to do it our way. So can you address that?
I think two things, Senator. One, as we indicated earlier, rule of law and making sure that the authority granted to the states under state implementation plans, delegation under certain clean water provisions, that's respected. But also, I think the EPA needs to provide more assistance to the states in working in partnership and be proactive. Those regional administrators that we have across the country need to be seen as partners and not adversaries. And so I think restoring that confidence, restoring that relationship, and seeking to do so is very, very important at carrying out this partnership that we know that exists under the various environmental statutes.
Very good. For the past 8 years, EPA has acted as a political arm of the Obama administration time and time again. We've seen rules develop not based on sound science, but on political ideology. When rules have been released, states and private sector, and even Congress, have had trouble getting EPA to show the science that helped develop these rules. Under your leadership, can we expect EPA to be more transparent? In other words, how the rules have been developed, the science behind them. And you've continued alluded to this, and I think it's so important. As administrator of the EPA, can we count on you to base all of your decisions on the rule of law, not on the administrators or even your own political ideology?
Absolutely, Senator, in response to the latter part of your question, but public participation is important. There's a reason why in rulemaking that you take comment. There's a reason, as I indicated earlier to Senator Ernst, that you involve those that are impacted by rulemaking, because you want to understand the impact, both economically and otherwise, in the benefit of the environment, as well as making sure that you craft rules and regulations that take all those things into consideration. So hearing the voices of all Americans in that rulemaking process, responding to those comments in the record before rules are finalized, transparency, objectivity, a commitment to process is very important, in my view, of restoring the confidence of the American people in the rulemaking processes that occur here in Washington, D.C.
So again, releasing the scientific data behind that would be something that you'd very much support.
Yes, Senator.
Very much. A problem that the EPW committee is faced with the current administration is a lack of communication. Time and time again, EPA either did not respond to questions from committee members or at the very least took months to respond. Under your leadership, can we expect EPA to get committee members' answers in a timely fashion?
Yes, Senator. As I indicated in my opening statement, listening is an important role of leadership, and listening to the voices of folks here in Congress. As I went through and met with many of you through this process, there were issues particular to your state that you made me aware of, and I, if confirmed, as EPA Administrator, seek to be very active in listening to the needs with respect to your various states and respond to this body with respect to questions.
Let me just comment on the Arkansas-Oklahoma issue. I was the congressman in that district. And so I inherited that in 2001. I've been working on this for 15 years. And I appreciate you and Attorney General McDaniel doing a very good job of getting things done. On the other hand, the idea that somehow you were soft, in fact, I would argue that the agreement that was reached was way too restrictive and is probably one of the most restrictive watersheds as far as phosphorus requirements of any place in the United States.
Well, as you know, Senator, in that process, we actually selected a biologist from Baylor University to engage in a scientific study on what the phosphorus level should be, the numeric quality of the water. And it was determined at the end of that process that .037 was the right standard and is now enforceable on both sides of the border for the first time in history. So it is a very important
No, I understand, and I commend you on the process. I just, the implication here is somehow, you came up with a deal that was too soft. And if anything, I would argue that it was perhaps a little bit too harsh. So, but I do appreciate the process. I know that you and our former Attorney General were able to do something that had been going on for decades.
Thank you, Senator.
You've been at it now for about 2 hours. If you can stay with us till we finish the first round of questioning. We have about 5 or 6 additional questions coming. Senator Harris is next, and then we'll break at about 12:30, if that's all right with you.
Make a unanimous consent request, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record the legal brief against the mercury and air toxics rule, which Mr. Pruitt supported, and stated in that brief, and I'll just quote it, it says, human exposure to methylmercury resulting from coal-fired electric generating utilities is exceedingly small, close quote. That's the quote. I also ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a recent article that quotes, I think from the New York Times, it quotes a 40-year career employee of the Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality that has him saying these words. He, Mr. Pruitt, has advocated and stood up for the profits of businesses, be it poultry companies or the energy industry and other polluters, at the expense of people who have to drink the water or breathe the air. And other statements have been introduced for the record saying quite a different thing about Mr. Pruitt. I think it's only fair to go to someone who's worked there for 40 years that has quite a different view than the one that our witnesses expressed. Thank you.
Without objection. Senator Harris.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Pruitt, as an Attorney General, I know as a former Attorney General of California that we as Attorneys General have several duties, which include representing our clients, state agencies, and also the discretion and power to initiate lawsuits in our independent capacity as Attorneys General. Would you agree with that?
Some states provide more latitude than others.
Does your state?
Our state is not provided constitutionally as much authority as other states.
Have you never exercised your independent capacity as Attorney General to bring a legal action?
Senator, I would have to know more specifics about what you're referring to, but in response to your question, it does.
Have you ever exercised your independent capacity as the Attorney General of your state to initiate a legal action? Yes or no?
The litigations that we've engaged in largely have been in consultation with agencies that
largely. So you have also exercised your independent capacity as the Attorney General of your state. Is that correct?
I may have, Senator. I don't.
You don't know if you have or not? You've been Attorney General for your state for almost 7 years. Is that correct?
Approaching that, yes, 6 years actually.
And I've read that you have initiated, and it has been mentioned before, 14 lawsuits in your independent capacity as the Attorney General of Oklahoma, and apparently 7 of those cases have been resolved, 6 of which you have lost. My question is, I hear that you are a lover of baseball. What would your batting average then be?
It was generally above 300, which is pretty good for a second baseman.
Yeah, my calculation is it's 142. Moving on, would you agree that as attorneys who have the responsibility for doing the work of justice, in particular as an Attorney General, that we make decisions based on propriety and impropriety? We make decisions based on what is not only an actual conflict, but what is an appearance of conflict. Would you agree that's important?
I believe that's important, Senator.
Okay, and so on this issue of whether or not you would be recused if you are nominated and actually voted in as the administrator of the EPA, you have said that you will recuse yourself from the cases your office has been involved with if directed to do that. Do you agree that you also have the discretion to recuse yourself from those cases?
I believe, Senator, the rules of professional conduct, in addition to the review that OGE...
Do you believe that you have the discretion to recuse yourself from the cases that you were involved with as Attorney General?
I think it's actually stronger than that, Senator. I actually have an obligation in those instances as directed by Ethics Council, and that's the reason I indicated earlier that
independent of any direction from Ethics Council, do you agree you have the discretion to recuse yourself from those cases?
I believe that it's important to maintain...
I'm asking about whether or not you actually have the discretion, the power to recuse yourself. Do you disagree or agree with that?
Clearly, there's a discretion to recuse.
Clearly. You're familiar with the Clean Air Act, yes?
I'm sorry, Senator?
You are familiar with the Clean Air Act?
I am.
And as you may know, Section 209, Subdivision B of the Clean Air Act recognizes California's authority to issue air pollution standards for new motor vehicles that go above and beyond federal standards. The EPA has historically recognized California's authority to issue new motor vehicle pollution standards that go above and beyond federal standards. In your opening statement, you write, it is not EPA's mission to be against sectors of industry in general or against particular states. Will you commit then to upholding that same standard and recognizing California's authority to issue its own new motor vehicle air pollution standards?
You know, Senator, as you indicated, California was actually regulating those standards before the EPA was actually created, which is why the California waiver exists under statute.
Do you agree to uphold that same standard that has been held by your previous
I agree to review that as each administrator before me has. It's been granted at times.
Do you agree to uphold it? Reviewing and upholding are two different points.
Senator, as you know, administrators in the past have not granted the waiver, and in fact have granted the waiver. That's a review process that will be conducted.
What is your intention, sir?
I don't know without going through the process to determine that, Senator, and one would not want to presume the outcome.
In the 14 cases that have been previously mentioned, in each of those cases, regulated companies were also a party to your suits. Is that correct?
In some instances, yes.
In most of them. Can you name a few instances in which you have filed a lawsuit in your independent capacity as Attorney General against a corporate entity for violating state or federal pollution laws?
Senator, I have a list here that's been provided.
Can you name them, please?
Sure. There's a list that that has been.
Can you name one?
Yes. The first is the Mayhard Egg Farm involving a CAFO situation and a cleanup of a large hen operation that affected water quality.
Did you file a lawsuit in that case, sir?
I did, Senator.
Okay, and what was the outcome of that case?
We received a good outcome against them.
And the name of that entity was what?
Mayhard Egg Farm.
And can you name any other cases where you have actually filed a lawsuit against a corporate entity for violating federal pollution laws?
In fact, that case was brought in conjunction with the EPA, and I want to address something, Senator, earlier. When you say independent capacity, those cases that you referred to, the list of cases, were as an extension of the DEQ in the state of Oklahoma, an extension of agencies at the state level that had authority granted to them by this body that we were.
And I understand that role as a former Attorney General, but that is you representing your client. I'm asking about your independent capacity as the Attorney General of your state. Let's move on. On the issue of mercury.
I would suggest that the Senator's time has expired in terms of moving on. Thank you. I would like to introduce for the record a letter by J.D. Strong, who is the director of the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation, who, in reference to the submission recently by the ranking member, makes reference to that a former employee who is retired from the state of Oklahoma and is currently serving as vice chairman of the Oklahoma chapter of the Sierra Club. So that the references are from now someone who is no longer a state employee, but the vice chairman of the Oklahoma chapter of the Sierra Club. But this letter from Mr. Strong goes to talk about the efforts by Attorney General Pruitt, who says, for the past 6 years, General Pruitt has been instrumental in many of our successes and has never asked me to compromise regulatory efforts to benefit industry. He says, on the contrary, all of our projects and cases that involved his office were given staff support at the highest level and more often than not resulted in more stringent environmental protection. He has been a strong ally in defending our ability to continue the great progress that we made in protecting Oklahoma's environment.
Mr. Chairman, let me ask, in response, let me just ask for unanimous consent to, for the record, and this is on behalf of Senator Whitehouse, rebuttal articles for Mr. Pruitt's claim on litigation against fossil companies. Top line points from these articles are, one, that they are fraud cases first and foremost. Second, some were brought by his predecessor, Drew Edmondson. The case, third point, a case against BP was filed and left dormant, at least per E&E publication. And also that Mr. Pruitt fought against the participation of state whistleblowers in the litigation. That was a reference to Quitom action. Thank you.
Yeah, without objection. Good. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General Pruitt. It's good to see you again. Thank you for your willingness to serve, and to your family. As you know, it's a team effort, so I want to thank them as well. I appreciated your opening statement, particularly your written statement, and I want to emphasize we all want clean air. We all want clean water. My state of Alaska has some of the cleanest air, cleanest water, pristine environment literally in the world. But your emphasis on the ability to do both, to grow an economy, to develop our resources responsibly and protect the environment, I think is very, very important, and I appreciate that focus. I believe the EPA needs a serious course correction. As Senator Ernst talked about, there's a lot of anger, even fear of this agency throughout many parts of the country, and I believe you are the right person to provide that course correction and do something that's very important, which is regain the trust of the American people that I think has been lost in a lot of places in America because of the overreach, because of the lack of focusing on the law. So there's been a lot of discussion this morning about cooperative federalism. And can you explain it in a little more detail? Is that your term, or is that a term that, did you come up with that, or is that something that was actually directed by Congress?
Directed by Congress, Senator.
And so in the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, who was given, what entity in our Republican form of government was given the primary responsibility over clean air and clean water in the United States?
Well, as you know, Senator, under the Clean Air Act, there's something called state implementation plans that the EPA and the states review together, but the states have that responsibility.
So
of adopting a plan.
Isn't it correct, actually, in the law, it says the primary responsibility under the Clean Air Act and Clean Water, and who directed that?
Congress.
Okay, so when you're talking about cooperative federalism, that's not some Scott Pruitt invented. You are focusing on the intent of the Congress.
Probably more so than any statutes that have been adopted by Congress historically. The environmental statutes that we know from Clean Water to Clean Air to Safe Drinking Water Act, many pieces of legislation, Congress has been very explicit, very specific at saying that cooperative federalism, the role of the states is important, should be respected, and should be emphasized.
So let me show you a chart here. This is the waters of the U.S. In the states and entities that sued to stop that rule. 32 Democrats and Republicans and independents. Do you think this is an example of cooperative federalism? And if not, if you're confirmed, what are you going to do to get back to what is not a Scott Pruitt idea? It's the direct direction of the Congress of the United States.
Senator, when you think about the relationship between the EPA and the states are not mere vessels of federal will. They don't exist simply to carry out federal dictates from Washington, D.C. There are substantive requirements, obligations, authority, jurisdiction granted to the states under our environmental statutes. That needs to be respected. When it's not respected, that is what spawned most of this litigation that has been referenced here today. And why does it spawn it? Because it matters. Yep. It matters that the states participate in the way that Congress has directed, and they've been unable to do so for a number of years.
So again, cooperative federalism, you're carrying out the will of Congress when you're focused on that issue.
That's exactly right. The expertise, the resources, the knowledge, the awareness of how to fix environmental issues at the local level is something that's important for the entire country to know.
So I am a former Attorney General myself who's sued the EPA. Some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, Judge Booker's comments, I think he tried to equate a little bit suing the EPA not caring for Oklahoma's children. Do you care about Oklahoma's children?
Without question. I've got a couple sitting behind me.
14 lawsuits, and again, Senator Bozeman mentioned this. What has been the primary focus of those lawsuits? It's not that you don't care about the environment, is it?
Absolutely not. I mean, it's something I care very much about the environment. It's to restore the relationship and ensure the relationship that Congress has directed, the role of the states in improving our environment. There's an idea in Washington that the states, those in Oklahoma or in Alaska or other parts of the country, don't care about the water we drink or the air we breathe. The farmers and ranchers, those in industry in the state of Oklahoma that I'm aware, most of them are very committed to that. When they have not been, we have taken enforcement action against them.
And just one final question. A lot of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle spend a lot of time, and I think Senator Sanders is up next, vilifying the oil and gas industry, somehow bad actors, polluters. According to the American Petroleum Institute, 364,000 Oklahomans work in the oil and gas industry or related service sectors. Are these people bad actors? Are they polluters? Can you describe, you talk about the good people in your written statement. Who are these people, and are you representing them when you're bringing these kind of actions? Are they evil people?
No, Senator. They want to comply with the law. They want to know what's expected of them. They care about the air they breathe and the water they drink, and they want to make sure that the EPA is partnering with state agencies and industry to ensure that that outcome occurs.
And aren't these hundreds of thousands of people part of that industry?
Absolutely. In fact, I mean, 25% of our entire state budget in Oklahoma is from that industry. This is a state concern. And more than that, we have significant regulation over this industry. Our Corporation Commission has oversight over many of these issues. And so we have regulatory bodies from DEQ to the Corporation Commission to others that are involved in making sure that the air we breathe and the water we drink is clear in the state of Oklahoma.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Pruitt, for being willing to serve this administration, for your interest in public service and your past public service.
Thank you, Senator.
I want to talk to you about some of the constituents in my state and the challenges, the very real challenges we face. First, we had millions of people's lives upended with Superstorm Sandy. I mean, millions of people. We had parents who lost their children, who drowned because of surges of water coming through their homes, through the streets. The devastation was literally unparalleled in my state. It was just something we had never seen before. And we are going to be looking to you to protect these families and protect these communities, because we know with global climate change, the incidence of superstorms and violent weather impacts is changed. It's very, very different. And you've already told folks that you do believe that global climate change is real. It has been caused by human activity. Do you believe also that sea levels are rising?
Senator, I believe that the EPA, addressing this issue because the Mass v. EPA case and the endangerment finding, has obligations to address the CO2 issue. But in doing so, they need to follow the processes as set up by Congress. And so I think it's very important to do both.
But you've studied this issue of sea levels. You do realize they are rising, and it's one of the reasons why these storm surges were so high and devastating communities all across New York City. So I need you to be vigilant because lives are at stake, and I think you have the purview to do that. Will you be vigilant?
Senator, we will obviously address those issues that we've talked about in your office, and I appreciate your passion on this issue.
One of the other issues that we talked about that I think is equally as concerning is issues of mercury that have been raised, about asthma rates that have been raised, about groundwater polluted. I've looked at your record. Most of the lawsuits you filed as Attorney General were related to businesses, specifically what was important for your state in terms of employers and businesses. And the few lawsuits you did file about human safety were few and far between. But this role as head of the EPA, you're going to have a much more important role to play. And I want to talk specifically about mercury. If you believe that mercury is a threat to public health, but oppose the remedy of reducing mercury air pollution from power plants because it's too costly, what then do you think you should do or what should be done to address the mercury pollution?
Well, let me say, Senator, the mercury is something, it is a hazardous air pollutant under Section 112. It is something that the EPA has authority to regulate and should regulate. It should do so, though, within the framework established by this body, and the Supreme Court said that the EPA did not follow the cost-benefit obligations. It's not that the benefits outweigh the cost, it's just that they simply didn't engage in a proper record-based support for their rule. And so that goes back to earlier questions with other senators about the process mattering, being committed to the rule of law and the rulemaking authority that Congress has given the EPA, and making sure that as rules are passed, that they can be upheld in court.
But I need you also to be worried about human health. I understand there's a cost, but when you're talking about lives, when you're talking about children who can't breathe, I've been to the emergency room at 2 in the morning with a child who can't breathe. It's a horrible thing. We've had children die in New York City because none of their teachers, no administrators in their schools knew what to do when a child has an asthma attack. It's a huge problem. So I need you to care about human health and really believe that the cost when human health is at risk, when people are dying, is far higher than it is the cost to that polluter to clean up the air and change their processes. I need you to feel it as if your children sitting behind you are the ones in the emergency room. I need you to know it.
And Senator, I would say to you, there are certain instances where cost can't even be considered, as you know. Those criteria pollutants under an ACTS program, cost is not even a factor because human health is the focus.
So let's talk about that. So you and I previewed this in my office. We have a horrible problem in New York State with Superfund sites and with groundwater that is polluted. We have PFOA in our water. We have the largest PCB Superfund site in the United States in the Hudson River. when families who don't have money fish in the Hudson River, they eat those fish, they get ill. It is horrible. The contaminants are real, they are pervasive, and they are destroying lives. They're also destroying the economy, because when you have contaminants all over the place, you can't sell your house. You can't put in industries that are relying on tourism. It's a huge problem. So PFOA is an example of a chemical that needs to be tested. I need you to put it #1 on your list, to test it. And if it is the carcinogen that many scientists have said it is, it needs to be banned.
The TSCA authority that's been granted by this body, you and I talked about that in your office, PFOA needs to be addressed quickly, even under the Safe Drinking Water Act as well.
Will you commit to doing that work?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Senator.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request. I'd like to submit for the record, and this sort of in response to a question raised by Senator Harris. And Mr. Pruitt, in his response to her question on whether he had ever filed a lawsuit against a corporate entity for violating state or federal pollution, apparently was not correct. I want to just submit for the record a list of cases that have been active under Mr. Pruitt's leadership. It notes which ones were started by his predecessor, and it shows that the case in which he mentioned in his exchange with Senator Harris, I think it was the egg case, was it Mahard egg case, actually was initiated not by Mr. Pruitt, but by his predecessor. Thank you.
Without objection. And I'd like to submit to the record as well, having heard that some of my Democrat colleagues have expressed their concerns that Attorney General Pruitt is not open to the finding of science, especially as it relates to climate change. This is not so. I'd like to call the committee's attention to a letter by the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. The letter is signed by 130 scientists, economists, legal scholars, policy experts, religious leaders, and over 230 other citizens urging Attorney General Pruitt's confirmation. The group includes David Legetz, who's a PhD in climatology, professor of climatology and geography at the University of Delaware. The author praises Pruitt, stating, "Mr. Pruitt has also demonstrated understanding of and open-mindedness toward scientific insights crucial to the formulation and implementation of environmental regulation." The organization's founder and national spokesman, Calvin Beisner, is quoted in the press release announcing the letter as saying the following: "Some environmental activists are determined to prevent Mr. Pruitt's confirmation, painting him as a science denier or a climate change denier." Mr. Beisner continues, "He is neither. He's a solid, common-sense Attorney General who will bring much-needed reform to the EPA." Without objection, the letter will be submitted for the record. Senator Wicker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member. I think it's been a good hearing so far. I think we have a lot of information that will be reassuring to the American people. One thing I do object to, though, is it's something that's happened for years since I've been a member of this committee, and that's somehow to list political contributions and suggest that somehow they make an individual suspect or not qualified. My dear friend from Rhode Island showed a poster and showed some contributions and suggested that based on those contributions from companies like Southern Company, for example, who's contributed to my campaign, that his appropriateness for the job should be challenged. And so I'm glad that the chairman had added to the record this article from September 6 from the Wall Street Journal, September 6 of last year, pointing out that Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton raised significantly more money than Donald Trump from the oil and gas industry. Individuals who work for oil and gas companies donated $149,000 to Mr. Trump's GOP campaign as of the date of July 30, compared with $525,000 to Mrs. Clinton. Mr. Chairman, I'm glad you put this in the record, and presumably based on that argument, Hillary Clinton would be suspect were she to have been nominated for the position of heading the EPA. Now, Mr. Attorney General, let's talk about states as partners. And I enjoyed your exchange with Senator Cardin about the Chesapeake Bay program. As I understand, you actually applaud the Chesapeake Bay program, and particularly the way the EPA worked with states as partners. Is that correct? And could you enlarge on that?
Senator, I absolutely applaud the effort by the states to join together in a 6-state coalition to address the quality of the Chesapeake Bay's water quality. I mean, that's what we did in Arkansas. Oklahoma and Arkansas did with the scenic Illinois River that's already been talked about with Senator Bozeman and others. And so I think the effort that they engaged in was something that other states ought to model, and the EPA came alongside and took that TMDL and is providing assistance to those 6 states with respect to that agreement.
Now, with regard to the Clean Power Plan and the Waters of the United States rules, where did those regulations go wrong in this respect?
Well, with respect to the Clean Power Plan, in the cases, the Supreme Court has actually sent a step that the Supreme Court took. Never in history had the Supreme Court issued a stay against a rule like the Clean Power Plan. And they did so because of the likelihood of success on the merits, in the sense that the Clean Power Plan did not reflect the authority of Congress given to the EPA to regulate CO2. As an example, with respect to power generation, there has to be a significant finding that it poses risk to public health and welfare. They did not do that. They did not go through the proper processes of inside the fence and regulations of facilities, power generation facilities. So those matters, Senator, are about rule of law, and the same is true with the Waters of the United States rule.
Now, you know, and I have not delved into this as an attorney as you have, but I can tell you that the Department of Environmental Quality in my state told me very emphatically that the Clean Power Plan would put us out of business because we would not have had an alternative to the coal that we use, and so I hope we can continue to make progress on this issue. Let me ask you about wood products. Federal government buys a lot of lumber, uses a lot of wood in construction, and procures a lot of wood. There are standards certifying that the forests are appropriate. One is the American Tree Farm System. Another is the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. EPA seems to like a certification program called the FSC, the Forest Stewardship Council. Problem is, with this certification program, it excludes 90% of the lumber grown in the United States of America. We have had a lot of activity on both sides of the aisle in challenging this, and I object also to a so-called interim recommendation made by EPA in this regard. As far as I'm concerned, it is discrimination against domestic wood, and now they have come back and told us that this interim recommendation is under review. Could you comment about both of these, the idea of an interim recommendation being imposed on an entire industry, and also give us any thoughts you have about using the Forest Stewardship Council certification model as opposed to these other perfectly good Sustainable Forestry Initiative and American Tree Farm System.
And if I could ask you to do it briefly as the Senator's time.
Senator, as you and I discussed in our meeting, I'm very concerned about the latter issue and making sure that all voices, all options are considered as something the EPA administrator should do, and I would seek to do if confirmed. With respect to the interim step, I think that there is a concern that many have offered throughout the last several years that regulators in Washington, not just the EPA, are seeking to use guidance or other steps to avoid what would be called formal rulemaking that Congress has obligated those agencies to perform to ensure exactly what you just described, that all voices are heard. And that's unfortunate when agencies do that, because that's an abuse of the process.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize for being late, but we were at a hearing with Congressman Price, who is the nominee for HHS, and perhaps not a great idea to have important nominating hearings at exactly the same time. So I apologize for not being here earlier. My office has received a great deal of comments from people in the state of Vermont, which takes environmental protection very seriously, as well as from all over the country. And the fear is that the nomination of Mr. Pruitt is a nomination designed to protect the fossil fuel industry and not the environment. I would like to ask Mr. Pruitt a question. As I understand it, earlier in this hearing, you said that Mr. Trump was wrong in suggesting and stating over and over again that climate change was a quote-unquote hoax. Is that in fact the case?
That is correct, Senator.
Okay. Let me ask you this. As you may know, some 97% of scientists who have written articles for peer-reviewed journals have concluded that climate change is real, it is caused by human activity, and it is already causing devastating problems in our country and around the world. Do you believe that climate change is caused by the emission, by carbon emissions, by human activity?
Senator, as I indicated, you weren't in here during my opening statement, but as I indicated in my opening statement, the climate is changing, and the human activity contributes to that in some manner.
In some manner?
Yes, sir.
97% of the scientists who wrote articles in peer-reviewed journals believe that human activity is the fundamental reason we are seeing climate change. You disagree with that?
I believe the ability to measure with precision the degree of human activity's impact on the climate is subject to more debate on whether the climate is changing or whether human activity contributes to it.
While you are not certain, the vast majority of scientists are telling us that if we do not get our act together and transform our energy system away from fossil fuel, there is a real question as to the quality of the planet that we are going to be leaving our children and our grandchildren. So you are applying for a job as administrator for the EPA to protect our environment. Overwhelming majority of scientists say we have got to act boldly, and you're telling me that there needs to be more debate on this issue and that we should not be acting boldly.
No, Senator, as I've indicated, the climate is changing, and human activity.
But you haven't told me
impacts
why you think the climate is changing.
Well, Senator, the job of the administrator is to carry out the statutes as passed by this body and to comply
Why is
with
the climate changing?
Senator, in response to the CO2 issue, the EPA administrator is constrained by statutes.
I'm asking your personal opinion.
My personal opinion is immaterial.
Really?
To the job of
you are going to be the head of the agency to protect the environment, and your personal feelings about whether climate change is caused by human activity and carbon emissions is immaterial?
Senator, I've acknowledged to you that the human activity impacts the climate.
Impacts.
Yes.
Scientific community doesn't tell us it impacts. They say it is the cause of climate change. We have to transform our energy system. Do you believe we have to transform our energy system in order to protect the planet for future generations?
I believe the EPA has a very important role at regulating the emissions
You didn't
of
answer
CO2.
my question. Do you believe we have to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to do what the scientific community is telling us in order to make sure that this planet is healthy for our children and grandchildren?
Senator, I believe that the administrator has a very important role to perform in regulating CO2.
Can you tell me, as I think all of us know, Oklahoma has been subjected to a record-breaking number of earthquakes. Scientists in Oklahoma, or scientists say that Oklahoma is almost certain to have more earthquakes with heightened risk of a large quake probable to endure for a decade, and that the cause of this is fracking. Can you point me, picking up on Senator Harris's discussion with you, can you point me to any opinion that you wrote, any enforcement actions you took against the companies that were injecting waste fracking water?
Senator, let me say I'm very concerned about the connection between activity in Oklahoma.
And therefore, you must have taken action. I guess, can you tell me who you fined for doing this, if you're very concerned?
The Corporation Commission in Oklahoma is vested with the jurisdiction, and they've actually acted on that.
And you have made public statements expressing your deep concern about this.
We have worked through our...
You have made public statements. You're in a state which is seeing a record-breaking number of earthquakes. You're the Attorney General. Obviously, you have stood up and said you will do everything you can to stop future earthquakes as a result of fracking.
Senator, I've acknowledged that I'm concerned about...
You acknowledge that you are concerned. Your state is having a record number of... Well, if that's the kind of administrator for the EPA, your state's having a record-breaking number of earthquakes. You acknowledge you are concerned. If that's the kind of EPA administrator you will be, you're not going to get my vote.
Senator Inhofe.
Mr. Chairman, at UC request, I ask at this point in the record, that we reprint the Wall Street Journal op-ed piece that was written by two outstanding scientists called "The Myth of the Climate Change 97%.
Without objection. I have a little bit of time left in my questioning from the first round. I wanted to talk about some of the concerns I have with overregulation, and I asked, do you have the same concerns with the overregulation of U.S. manufacturing over the last 8 years? I believe it's exported manufacturing jobs overseas, jobs that go with them in terms of the manufacturing of those goods to places like China and India that are going to produce those products in a less environmentally friendly way. And do you agree with this notion that this approach harms not just the environment, but also our own U.S. economy?
I believe, Senator, that it puts us at an economic disadvantage when we don't hear all voices in the rulemaking process with respect to these issues. Absolutely.
I'd also like to submit for the record an op-ed on CNN by Jeb Bush saying Scott Pruitt is ready to turn around the EPA. He said, I cannot think of a person more suited to lead the Environmental Protection Agency than Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt. He has acknowledged human impact on the climate and supports a robust discussion about its effects and what the government should and shouldn't do to address it. And then also submitting for the record a report that I did as a ranking member of the Subcommittee on Clean Air and Nuclear Safety of this committee. This was a couple of years ago, called Red Tape Making Americans Sick. I put this together as a physician, where we talk about unemployment. Long-term unemployment increases the likelihood of hospital visits, illnesses, premature deaths in communities due to joblessness. It hurts children's health, hurts family well-being, and quote scientists who point that the unemployment rate is well established as a risk factor for elevated illness and mortality rates in epidemiological studies performed since the 80s. And additionally, there's influencing on mental disorders, on suicide, alcohol abuse, alcoholism. We also see it with spouse abuse, drug abuse, so that the regulations that come out of the EPA that do cut into employment of hardworking Americans actually contributes to a deterioration of their health. I don't know if you have any comments on that or what you may have seen in Oklahoma at times of unemployment.
Senator, we've seen similar issues in Oklahoma. We have prescription drug abuse that occurs at rates that are unprecedented as other parts of the country. And so there is a similar concern that we have in Oklahoma.
It is, I appreciate your patience, your honesty, your forthright presentation this morning. We are going to go to a second round. I now have about 12:45. If it's all right with you, Ranking Member Carper, we'll come back in an hour. We'll take an hour break and come back and resume with a second round of questioning at 1:45. The committee is in recess.
Thank you, Senator. Back hour or two. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I guess you do it over here. I'll ping you. Good. Yeah. Oh, like 3 more years, but the building's fine. I mean, honestly, God, every photographer now.
You were in
Florida. Yeah.
I'm in every photo that right there.
So as you heard, the confirmation hearing for EPA Administrator in a break for an hour. We will resume our live coverage here on C-SPAN 2 when they come back. In the meantime, we will go live to